Even before actually creating charts in Excel, it's a good idea to start becoming familiar with some of the various components of charts and some of the terms you're going to see repeatedly as you work with Excel charts. On this particular worksheet here, we see some data. I've highlighted it in green, and this data is being reflected in a number of different charts on this same worksheet. The chart to the right of the data is a line chart, very common type. I'm going to click on it. And one of the things you'll start to recognize as you work with charts is as you move the mouse pointer around, and you don't need to click, and I haven't clicked here, but the term plot area has appeared just below the cursor. If I slide out into the green outer area, that's called a chart area. And nearly every chart will have those two areas. And I wouldn't say you memorize these terms, but you will quickly start to become familiar with them. And what's this title here? Well, it's a chart title. And how about this line? What's that line? It's a series. If you're near a point, it'll actually refer to a point and give you a reference back to the actual data as well. Here's a different series. There's a pie chart off to the right, and there's a chart area. The chart area is the outer perimeter area near the border. The inner area, and we don't really have to find it all the time, but here is called the plot area. Now, that's kind of vague. Think of that pie chart as being in a rectangle. And what's this piece of the pie here? It's part of a series. And you'll see these more and more. Moving back onto the line chart, maybe to the lower left corner, a very common type of chart, a column chart. What do we see down the left-hand side? A vertical axis. How about below the data? A horizontal axis. What do we see to the right many times in charts? You might see an individual series. If you move more toward the edge, that's a legend. No doubt you've seen those on maps before. The chart to the right of this is a 3D column chart. Colorful, not always the most readable. But what do we have in here that might be a little bit different? As I slide the mouse right here, that's a side wall. And sure enough, a back wall. And by now you've probably figured out what's on the bottom. It's the floor of the chart. So it's not to obsess over this or to go to all the different chart types in Excel and figure out what every single item of it is called. But these terms generally fall under the category of a chart element. Each one of these is a chart element. And there will be times in certain charts when you need to make changes to these elements. Now, something new, or better yet, something resurrected in Excel 2010, when you want to make a change to a chart element. If you have been using charts in Excel 2007, one rule of thumb has been right-click on an element. Suppose in this line chart you want to make a change to this line somehow. If you right-click the element, you can go to a series of choices, and the last one is always the word Format, followed by the item that you right-clicked on. Then you can go there and explore within a dialog box some changes you might want to make there. Now you can still do that, and I showed how to do it here in 2010, but in 2007, what a lot of people missed was the ability to double-click on a chart element and get to a dialog box. That has existed in prior versions of Excel, and now it's back in 2010, and generally it's faster. So if I want to make a change to this line here, I'll point to it and double-click. And there's that dialog box, and you'll find that very handy. And it often is a fast way to get into that sequence of steps that you need to get to when you're trying to change an element. There will be times when you try and change a chart element, but you can't quite click on it. It could be a line that's kind of tiny, and maybe the chart's smaller and you're trying to click, and maybe you can't quite click on the line. I was able to do it here, but here and there, that's not always so doable. And there's a chart below this where it's particularly difficult. One of the series here is incredibly tiny. It's the miles per gallon. And it's hard to click on that, and you could easily fumble around a little bit trying to do that because you want to make a change. So something else to be aware of on the Layout tab, and we will talk in another movie about how this plays out, but you will see the term Layout, and the extreme left side has a drop arrow. And here are all the chart elements within that particular chart. So here's a variety of them. Again, you don't want to be memorizing these, but I think you'll quickly absorb the meaning of these various portions of a chart. So if you want to click on this element or that element, now in doing this, I clicked back on the line chart. So right now we're seeing the elements within the line chart. If I click back on the worksheet here, scroll down to this lower chart here, and just click this chart, and then go to that Layout tab, left button in the current selection group, click the drop arrow next to whatever element is currently selected, and we see those other elements. So if we click Series MPG, then we could go ahead and make some changes there by the choice below it, Format Selection. So sometimes you'll need to go down that path. Now again, some of this is premature because maybe you're not quite ready to create charts, but becoming familiar with the terminology in Excel is very helpful, not only in this course, but anytime you pick up a book on Excel, you will see some of the terms that we've already brought out: chart area and plot area, and series and walls and legends and so on. Excel has a number of different chart types available, and they're not all equally effective in depicting the data that you've got in a meaningful way. Most Excel users agree that a line chart, like the one we see to the right of the data here, is probably the best type for showing a trend. If you're trying to accentuate the volume, perhaps a column chart like we see below the data is better. And there's a variation on that, a 3D column to the right of that as well. There are other chart types too that might have special uses. There are stock charts, there are area charts, and here and there, some are going to be more effective than others. And a lot of this is subjective too. Your particular take on it, your particular read on it. Sometimes you're trying to adhere to conventions that your company has used in prior years too for charts. Quite a few choices here, over 70 basic chart types available, and it's a good idea to experiment with different kinds of charts. And even if you haven't created a chart, if you're looking at this particular worksheet, for example, you might say, well, how else might this data look? And so clicking the chart below the data here, this green border chart, just click this chart. How might we view this in a different way? And you'll notice when you do click on a chart, you will see some new tabs. Here's a Design tab at the top of the screen, and the extreme left button is called Change Chart Type. And ultimately in this dialog box, you will see 73 choices. And you can start at those. You'll see some unusual chart types. Perhaps some of these you've never seen or used before. But the very first one is the most common one, and you're likely to see a lot of charts of this type. They are referred to as column charts. And almost the same, but rotated 90 degrees. You'll see these farther down the list here. Bar charts, same general idea, but just rotated differently. Now, we might turn this into a bar chart. Choose this. Click OK. Is that better? Maybe, maybe not. I don't think it's better, but at different times I've changed my mind about how things are viewed. Depends on what you're looking for. Line chart here, we've mentioned this. Pretty good at showing a trend. Let's change it. Now, how much time does this take to change? Not much at all. And to make it slightly faster, double click. So let's double click this column choice maybe. How's that look? Maybe pretty good? Is that better than the line chart? Maybe? Change the chart type. It's so easy, it's so fast. And you do want to explore a little bit. Maybe you want to try a pie chart, or how about one of these cylinder charts? Is that a better choice? I don't think so. One thing that will help you in this process too is to undo. And most of you are familiar with this button perhaps on the quick access toolbar, which might be above or below the ribbon, and a great keystroke shortcut, and you see it right there, Control Z. And in this course, I'll be using this a lot. I'm going to press Control Z right now. Sometimes you make a choice, you don't like it, and you can press Control Z repeatedly, or even click the drop arrow there to review recent actions. And the undo process can remember up to 100 of your last steps. And that becomes invaluable at times when you're making changes and then you want to reverse direction. So I could press Control Z a few more times, and this chart will change back to a line chart. And how about the chart below the data? It's going to change back to the column chart that we saw before. The pie chart to the right of the data has its uses, but it's definitely limited in how much it can show. And when you look at this pie chart, which has labels on it, I think you can begin to see why maybe these are not the best charts for certain kinds of data. Now, one by one, we will see in depth in different movies in this course more information about line charts and column charts and say this pie chart that we're looking at. But just a quick look. Look at the March value here of 125, and then the value on the back, sort of a gold-orange color, it's 180. Do they really look that different? Some people might say, well, I think maybe the green piece looks bigger. Well, maybe not, maybe it does, but you begin to see what's going on here. Some charts are not that great for showing the data the way you want it to be shown. And how about this 3D column chart here? colorful, interesting. We could tilt it, and there are all kinds of things you can do with it there to manipulate it. But can you tell me how much sales or profits, whatever this is showing, for one of those green columns? Can you read that? Is that over 100? Is it under 100? Now, when you point to it with the mouse, a nice little pop-up tells you what the value is. I think if you're just glancing at this, it's hard to read these. As a measure of how they vary relatively, perhaps that makes sense. We can see that the green totals here, representing Asia, are certainly taller than the Europe totals, which are in front of them. But the relative difference, well, here and there, not so easy. And sometimes you're trying to come up with that ideal chart that, on the one hand, shouldn't require a whole lot of explanation when you're trying to read it, and at the same time is interesting and more colorful. So there are quite a few different choices. Again, some other choices as I move to different sheets here. Here are some different column charts. I'll flip over to bar charts, and again, recognize here we're simply talking about practically the same kind of chart, just rotated 90 degrees. Bar charts, column charts. A few more line charts here. Actually, this is only one line chart here. There's another one off to the right. You can see these. And at different times, again, we emphasize showing data over a period of time, in this case, months. But I've seen line charts that cover hourly activity, perhaps hourly sales, even by minute with certain kinds of scientific data maybe. So quite a few different choices here. Some pie charts, one's 3D, one's 2D. There's some area charts. We'll talk about why you might want to use these. There's another kind of chart called scatter chart, and that's when you're comparing two sets of values. There are quite a few different chart types, and as we said, 73 to be exact, major chart types, and then you can take it from there and change them quickly and easily. And the more you work with charts, the more you'll begin to gravitate toward just a few types. And if you are only going to be using charts sparingly, I would recommend that you more or less stick to the big four, and that would be column charts, line charts, pie charts, and of course, from time to time, bar charts as well. And so here and there, remember, it's very easy to change the chart type. Don't hesitate to do that, and you'll quickly reduce your chart choices to a few favorites. Column and bar charts comprise the bulk of chart type usage for many Excel users. Three terms that you're likely to encounter when using these kinds of charts, as well as others, are the terms clustered, stacked, and 100% stacked. Let's look at these with column charts and then point out how you'll also encounter them with other chart types as well. The chart to the right of the data here is a clustered column chart. It's probably the default chart type in Excel unless you've made a change to it. It is certainly one of the most common chart types. Now, when you are creating charts or you're possibly changing charts, if you go to the Design tab, Change Chart Type, this is where we see all those choices. I'm just putting the mouse over this clustered column. In line charts, you'll have roughly the equivalent, but you don't see the word clustered. We will see these as we point to bar charts. There's a clustered bar. It's equivalent in area. You don't see that. And going back up here, you will see them in this kind of a bar chart. That's a clustered horizontal cylinder. Without beating this to death here, here's a clustered horizontal cone. And I guess the best way to describe clustered is that it's not stacked. There's a clustered cylinder and a clustered cone, and there's a clustered pyramid in there as well. So you will see that term along. And the chart to the right here is a clustered column chart, the one right here. Possibly we could change this, although let me close this instead of actually changing it. Point to the chart below the data here. This is a stacked column chart. And this type has its advantage in that at a glance, we can see grand totals. And it is slightly cleaner looking, and when you're dealing with lots of data, sometimes this simplifies the view. What isn't so good with these is when you're trying to compare colors across different months. Let me zoom in on this a little bit so we can see it better. Comparing the greens, for example, the two Asia totals here, certainly because of the pop-ups, we can see those are identical. But how about when you're trying to compare February over here and then June over here? A little bit tricky. And the ones we can read most easily are the ones that start at the bottom. But again, this is a common chart style. It's called stacked. And once again, we may not be trying to change this, but as we point back to the Design tab and go to Change Chart Type, recognize that This is the stacked column, and we've also have the stacked cylinders, pyramids, and cones. And of course, as you would expect by now, we have these with bar charts and some of the other options here as well, including area and a few more. So you'll see that term. Now a third choice here, not nearly as popular as those two, but it's depicted here to the right. I'm going to zoom back just a little bit here so we can see this better. The chart right here below looks initially as if it's stacked, but you see percents down the side. And these kinds of charts are trying to do what a pie chart does. Pie chart can only handle one series, but this is called a 100% stacked. And so when we look at the left column here, we're saying in effect these four totals add up to 100%, and they do. But for February, we've got a different set of totals, but of course they add up to 100%. And here you can see something very misleading. If you are glancing at these and not absorbing what the chart really means, you would say Asia had a relatively high total in January, but not so high in February. Well, yes and no. Asia for January is 110, but it is a bigger portion of the total. Asia for February is 120. It's a smaller portion of the total because sales did go up in February. We go over and see the data. The January data adds up to 290. We see that over in cell B10, February data adds up to 390. So in these kinds of charts, and you will be able to, and we'll show you how to add additional labeling. The idea here, each column here represents 100%, and we're getting a relative breakout of the pieces here. So this is called a 100% stacked. And again, if we go to the Design tab and change chart type, and even though we don't really want to change it again, we'll begin to see this term again, 100% stacked, and we'll see it here and there, and of course with bar charts and with area charts and some other choices as well. So those terms, clustered, we don't see it on the area chart, but stacked, 100% stacked, and then clustered on our bar and column charts, terms we'll see a lot as we work with various Excel charts. One aspect of charting that might overwhelm you is the idea that there are so many different things we can do with charts, and the number of command possibilities is in the millions. Nobody's really counting. A quick read on how we use the menu system in Excel is going to help enormously here. Now we're not ready to create charts just yet, but we will, when ready, go to the Insert tab in the ribbon. The ribbon system, introduced in Excel 2007, is a colorful way to get started, and it's much easier than prior menu systems. And then inserting charts, we'll go there first, and start the process here, picking the chart type. Now, once a chart is selected, suppose for example you just created the chart below the data here. When a chart is selected, the ribbon system changes. And depending upon which book or information you're reading, it might be described in one of two ways. When you do click a chart, you see the term Chart Tools here. This is sometimes described as a new ribbon. At other times, it's simply described as a heading for 3 new tabs that exist on the ribbon. And if you're seeing this for the first time, if you click Design, quite a few choices there. You click Layout, many more. You'll click Format. You might be thinking, how can I ever master charts with all these choices? And it can be if you let it get to you a bit much here. So here's a general thought process, and we have structured this course to recognize that you will use the Design tab. Perhaps it's the most important of the 3, and we'll talk about a lot of the choices here. You will frequently use the Layout tab. Perhaps one way to describe this is the Fine-Tuning tab, with lots of choices for adding elements to a chart and controlling them. And then the Format tab, although not unimportant, perhaps less important, it tends to be more about the visuals that we need to adjust as we work with charts. And as I had mentioned in a prior movie, anytime you happen to double-click a series, perhaps, or a different chart element, that leads you into dialog boxes that are, you might say, independent of that ribbon system. So at different times, it is a bit bewildering to figure out how to get started. But again, a quick reminder here, when you click on a chart, the ribbon menu system has been altered. We have a Chart Tools section or ribbon, and we've got a Design tab, a Layout tab, and a Format tab. Quite a few different choices here. And the chart creation process begins with After selecting the data, we go to the Insert tab, so different locations here as we use the ribbon menu system. But there's no question that your knowledge of charting is going to be vastly improved if you remember these 3 tabs and think of them as being most important from left to right: design, layout, and format. The critical first step in creating charts is actually selecting the data you want to appear in a chart. On the worksheet here, we see a lot of numbers, and we might want to show what's happened in the first quarter of the year, or maybe the first half. That's all the data we have here. It covers various regions. You wouldn't necessarily think or know the text information that appears with your numbers should be included in that selection. Let's suppose that we wanted to show all 6 months of data here. Let's include the text that's typically above the data and to the left of it. Maybe you want to show just those 3 regions or just these 4. As a general rule, you want to not include totals along with detail. We've got an extra column on the right of totals, one below 2. Let's leave those off of here for now. For the moment, we're not emphasizing how to create the chart. I'm going to use a keystroke shortcut, which you'll see in a bit. But here's a chart that's been created simply based on the data that I selected. And we move this over a little bit, shrink it so we can see what's happened. And you can see what's been highlighted. When you do create a chart, sometimes you do change your mind and say, well, I think I wanted totals there. Well, I'll move the chart over a little bit more here and actually drag this corner. Let's see how the totals might look on this chart. And I think you can see why many times we don't want totals there. How about the totals below it instead? What if we were to not include these and then shift down and get these? That's a different look too. I don't think you'd want that. Most of us wouldn't. So as a general rule, keep off totals. But the main idea here is you're highlighting the data that you want. Suppose we want to create a different chart. Maybe we'll move that one over or keep it here for the moment. Maybe just the first 3 months. Highlight this data. Again, I'll use a keystroke shortcut for that. And as you would expect, we're just seeing 3 months of data here. Now, many times you'll simply drag across the cells that you want to appear in the chart. Excel knows what to do with that text on top of your data and to the left of it. Now, what if we wanted a different chart here that didn't include one of these regions? Or maybe we only want to show 2 of the regions. How about showing Europe and Latin America, but not the other 2? We would want the monthly information, so let's highlight this, let go of that left mouse button, then hold down the Control key, highlight the Europe data, let go of the left mouse button, hold down Control, highlight the Latin America data. We're all set here. We'll use another keystroke shortcut for creating this quickly. There we go, just Europe and Latin America. There are other times when all of the contiguous data you want to appear in a chart, and this might be a huge list. It's not that long really, but it could be thousands of rows. And if all the contiguous data here, all this data here, and we don't have to highlight it, if we want all of that to appear in a chart, simply click on one cell here. Once again, quick way. There it is. It's showing all of the data. We don't have to highlight it all. Had I done that with the previous worksheet, going back here again and getting rid of this chart, and that raises a question, how do you get rid of a chart? Click on its border or just inside in the chart area, press delete. I don't want this one either, press delete. I don't want this one, press delete, so on. If I were to click in this cell and create a chart quickly, Excel will automatically pick up all of this contiguous data, and I think you know this is not going to be an acceptable chart. There it is. Once again, totals there, and look at the percents, hopelessly lost in all this too. Now, there is the opportunity sometimes to say, for example, I want to show the totals here, but not the other data. This might work well in a pie chart. Maybe highlight that data. Letting go of that left mouse button, using the Control key, highlight this data. Once again, keystroke shortcut. I might eventually turn that into a pie chart, but that's not so bad either. So sometimes you will select non-contiguous areas, as we saw earlier with the regions. Here we're doing it with columns as well. So that first key step when you're creating a chart is to indicate what is going to go into the chart and a number of different ways to approach that. After indicating what data you want depicted as a chart, there are 2 major keystroke shortcuts that let you create charts instantly. In this worksheet here, I'd like to create a chart based on this data right here. I'm in a hurry. I might press F11. Watch what happens. A chart instantly, but on a new sheet. And if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a chart 1. The data is on a sheet called chart data right back here. So anytime you select data and press F11, you will get a new chart to the left of the current sheet. It'll be called chart 1, chart 2, etc. Now, unlike in older versions of Excel, you cannot resize this chart here, but the advantage of working with the chart all by itself on its own sheet is it's not in the way of other data in the sense of devoting your full attention to it. You can use all the different chart tools that you might want to get to here while focused only on this particular chart. At any time, you could change the location of this chart. You could move it onto a different worksheet, probably the one that has the data on it. So even if you don't want to keep the chart on a separate sheet, you can move it anytime you wish. Back to the chart data sheet, the other keystroke shortcut, one that was new in Excel 2007, is for those times when you want to create a chart right on the very worksheet where the data resides. So here the data is highlighted. I'm going to press Alt F1. In this example and in the previous one, the chart type that we get here is the default type in Excel, unless you have changed that default. It's called a clustered column chart. And here too, very fast, you might want to resize it. You can certainly do that quickly and easily from the corners. Remember, you cannot do this when the chart is on its own sheet. And of course, what you'd like to do, perhaps in some situations, is have more than one chart on this worksheet. You might want to show a different aspect to the data. If you want to focus on the totals only, or maybe use a line chart for just one of the regions, it's fast, it's easy. And sometimes it might involve maybe just one more step. Maybe this time we'll show just the first quarter, highlight the data, press Alt F1, there's a chart, and maybe now you'll quickly apply a design feature or some other technique to make it almost be what you want it to be. So it's fast and easy with our two keystroke shortcuts, F11 to take the selection and create a new chart on a different sheet, or Alt F1 to create a chart on the current sheet. The standard way to create a chart using the ribbon menu system requires just a few mouse clicks. In this particular worksheet, let's imagine that we want to create a chart maybe based on this data right here. The standard approach is to click the Insert tab in the ribbon, and then in a group called Charts, we might want to column chart, line chart, depending upon which of these we choose. Suppose we're thinking about a line chart. We will get various options. The example here, we see 6 examples of a 2D line chart, 1 example of 3D line, column, quite a few more examples. A lot of sub-examples here, cylinder, cone, pyramid, and so on. Bar chart, lots of choices here. If the chart type that you're looking for, if you don't find here, you might choose other charts. One of these here. I'll just stick with column for the moment. Pick the very first choice, click, and we have our chart. And it lacks just a few things. For many people, we're on the verge of creating a chart that's all set for publication or presentation. Fast and easy. Even without using keystroke shortcuts, creating a chart is a straightforward process. Requires just a short sequence of commands. After selecting the data, press Insert, press the chart type you want, and there's your chart. Whether you're in a hurry to create a chart or maybe you're just a casual chart user, applying the final touches to a chart sometimes requires just a few commands and you can get to them pretty quickly. There are so many features in Excel related to charts, but what if we are in a bit of a hurry here? What do we get out of basic chart building? Let's highlight this data here. Simply press Alt F1. We've got a chart, and maybe we want a column chart. Looking pretty good. But to someone looking at this, maybe the data isn't visible and we do want to accentuate right on the chart what these numbers mean, and we probably would want a title on top. Couple quick things to do here. Now, anytime you have a chart, if it's selected, the ribbon system has changed. Here's a Design tab, and one of the features here, not so obvious, is called Chart Layouts. Click this option right here. Now, without exploring every single one of these, what a lot of these have is a gray bar across the top, room for a chart title. A lot of them will have a gray bar down the left-hand side, so we can put in some kind of a title for these numbers here. Most of them show a legend, sometimes on the right side. I often, if it's a column chart, choose this one. If this were a bar chart, we'd see almost as many choices. A pie chart, maybe not so many, but depending upon the chart type, these options give us a quick lead-in. I'm going to click right here, and obviously I don't want those words chart title to appear there, so I'll just click this banner here and start typing. For example, Sales 2011. There we go. And I'll click the title on the left-hand side, Sales in Millions of Dollars, and press enter. I might not want a title at the bottom, or I'll just press delete if I don't want it. The legend is all set, and avoiding all fancy options, that's ready for presentation, and that's all it takes sometimes. Despite all these choices that we might get to later, it's pretty complete. It explains itself based on the colors that we're seeing, the monthly information, and the titles that we simply added by choosing chart layouts. So despite all the numerous adjustments you can make to a chart, making a chart complete, quote unquote, only takes a few steps. A new feature in Excel 2010, and one that expands your ability to provide a quick visual representation of data, is called spark lines. You could describe it as in-cell charts. It's not actually located with any of the other chart commands. It's a whole new series of possibilities. As we look at the data here on this worksheet called Sales Results, we're actually showing how much particular regions have exceeded their sales goals, or possibly, with the negative numbers, have fallen short of those goals. The chart below this is an attempt to show that information in a graphical way. It's a column chart, and if you were trying to look at the performance in the East here, I think you'd realize it's not the easiest thing to do. In fact, one by one, as you look at the different regions, the East columns here, the blue ones, and as I'm pointing to each one of them, we're not seeing this so clearly. Sure, you can read it, but not very clearly, as we're trying to isolate each region here. And you might be saying, well, how might this look as a line chart? So I'm going to go up to the Design tab, and then that left button, Change Chart Type. I want to make this be a line chart. There we go. And that's probably even worse, although we can see the lines connecting, but we can't see a single region without the clutter of the other regions there. So what if in cell N3, for starters, we could actually show a line chart representing these values right here. Let's go to cell N3, and in the ribbon, the Insert tab, a choice, spark lines, possibly a line, possibly a column, or possibly something called win-loss. Let's take a look at line first. We're going to put the chart right in cell N3. The data that we want to be represented there are the 12 months of data we see right here. Click OK. And that chart shows us what has happened throughout the East region month by month. Now, there's no indication in there as to whether anything is negative or not, so we'll show you in a bit different ways to make that happen. And why not have this line for each of the rows below this? In fact, even the totals at the bottom. So any one of these represents, for example, this is the South, this is the Midwest, and even though we can see that data in the line chart below, this gives us a good quick read on what's going on. Now, let's put one here and do the same kind of thing. Another type of spark line is a column. The data range for this one is going to be the same we saw before, right there. And here too, we could drop this downward, and here we see more clearly when there has been negative data. That jumps out at us pretty readily. And another type here simply shows win-loss, positive or negative. Let's insert that kind of a spark line here, again using the same range. I wouldn't say you need all three of these, but certainly one or two, your choice there, but a good quick visual representation what has happened. Now in some cases, of course, it's kind of boring with the win-loss. Look at the last choice here that shows our totals. In all cases here, they come up positive, but at other times, and depending upon the nature of the data, one of these sparkline types is likely to be your favorite over the other one for the specific data in place. And we can make adjustments to these too. Possibly I want these lines to be a different color. Recognize that when you do select the cell or cells with sparklines in them, you do have a new ribbon, Sparkline Tools, with a tab on it called Design. And of course, lots of choices there. Maybe we'll choose this one. And another thing we could do here too, on the Design tab, you'll notice some choices over here under Edit Data. We can change the source of the data. We don't want to do that right now. We could deal with the issue of hidden and empty cells. Would we want to hide the detail and just show the spark lines? I'm going to right-click and hide. We're not seeing any of these for the moment. So let me undo that. Then on the Design tab, as we choose just one of these, edit the data, hidden and empty cells. show data in hidden rows and columns. So possibly we might want to do that, then hide these. So there's some use for that capability as well. In other words, we're still seeing the charts, we're not seeing the data, and sometimes that's something we'd want to be able to do. I'm going to press Ctrl Z to unhide again. Another option that you might want to consider here too, and perhaps more so on the lines than the other options, is on the Design tab, the axis choice off to the right, you can see where we might want to show the axis. And that shows us where the negatives are occurring. And we can see that in the data, of course, but that makes these spark lines a bit better. We can also choose to have a dot at the high point. You see what's happening there? The green dots on the high point each time, and the low point if we wish, or just the negative points, so quite a few variations in there too. And zooming in and out on these might help too. Another option, and this of course has something to do with worksheet design, we could make the column wider. That stretches out the line. We could take these rows here, make them taller. That's another approach to this. It accentuates that. So you've got different ways to make this data stand out a little bit differently. In other words, you can get pretty creative. Again, recognize this isn't part of the standard chart feature. It's new in Excel 2010, and it gives you a lot of capability for getting a quick read on the data in a variety of different ways. Changing a chart's orientation is not an intuitive kind of thing to do, but I always recommend it as a way to give you a different perspective on the data. Many times this alternative is revealing, and sometimes it's even better than the initial display. What are we talking about here? It's a capability that we see on the Design tab in the ribbon. Third button from the left, switch row column. This chart to the right of the data, a clustered column chart, is showing in clusters what's happened each month for the regions here. And not a bad chart at that. What happens when we switch row column? Watch the chart. Now, I wouldn't say this is better, you might though. What do we see now? Instead of the clusters being by month, now they're by region. A different way to see the data. You can easily switch back and forth. And sometimes you'll realize, hey, I'd like to see both charts. Well, create another one simply by copying this, change its orientation. And the chart below the data here. A stacked bar chart shows the data in a reasonable way. How might this look? And again, let's try and keep some of the data, and we'll zoom back a little bit here so we can see that chart along with the data above it. The chart below the data here. Let's change the orientation of this. Again, Design tab, switch row column. To see what's happening there. Here too, I think this is not nearly as good as the first. Trying to differentiate those colors there isn't so great. It does, at least momentarily, accentuate that the domestic region has the largest share of the sales. Of course, we can see that in the data as well. But switching back and forth, I recommend it. I think you'll see on line charts, there's nearly always a clear alternative. Most times, a line chart is about a changing set of data over a period of time, and that's one of its great strengths. If you change the orientation on this chart, switch row column, I think you see totally unacceptable there. And on pie charts, the alternative often is pretty hopeless. Switch row column here too. Now, something about the way this works in a different sense too. If I'm highlighting data here to put into a chart, suppose here I've got a situation I just want to show 3 months. I'm going to press Alt F1, quick way to create a chart, and it clusters the data by region. What if I included 4 months? Not nearly as commonly done. I'm going to press Alt F1. Now it clusters them by month. Depending upon the number of rows and number of columns that you're highlighting or selecting to go into a chart, many times the chart you're getting here is not quite the one you want, so just switch the orientation. If you really did want to see the 3 months of data here, but you want the clusters by months, then simply switch row column. So once again, as you're creating charts, I highly recommend use the switch row column option often. It just helps sometimes to view your data in a different way, and it's an easy switch. Think of it as a toggle back and forth. If the default clustered column chart is not the kind of chart you're likely to need most often, you can change the default chart to another type. And furthermore, if you have a certain chart type that has design features on it, like a blue background, white foreground, whatever, you can save different chart types as templates. And then the next time you create a chart, you can use one of those templates instead of one of the standard built-in chart types. Let's suppose you've decided that this clustered column chart, although viable, is not the one you're using most often. And when you create charts quickly using perhaps keystroke shortcuts or even the menu, you want the chart type that comes up to be a clustered bar chart or a stacked bar chart. So the chart below the data on this worksheet here is a stacked bar chart, and you've decided that's the one you'd like to see most often. Make it be your default type. Having selected it, we can go to the Design tab in the ribbon, change chart type, and while we're here, simply say Set as Default Chart, and click OK. Alright, next time we create a chart, and from now on, regardless of how many cells are selected, maybe we only want to show 3 months, that's okay. How about 6 months here? I'm going to press Alt F1 to create a chart quickly. And it's not going to be the clustered column chart anymore. It's now a stacked bar chart because we changed that to be the default. And what if, furthermore, another one of your favorite chart types is this kind of a chart with certain kinds of colors added. So without going all the details of this, I'm going to go to the Format tab, give this a gold background, and maybe change the inside of it to be a different color. Okay, maybe that's something I really like. And from now on, when I create charts, I might want to have this option out there as something I would use. It doesn't mean that we're going to make this be the automatic choice, but I want it as part of my repertoire of frequently used charts. In other words, we're going to create a template here. So with this chart chosen, click the Design tab, the second button from the left in the ribbon, Save as Template, and we'll just call this Gold Background. And you don't have to make it this long necessarily. Stacked bar, and save. Okay, at a later time when I'm highlighting some data to create a chart, maybe I do want a chart like that. So on the Insert tab, Other Charts, All Chart Types, how about Templates? Now I only have one, and as I point to it, what does it say? Gold background stacked bar. There we go. And okay. So here's that new chart, and it has the color selections, and presume I could have done a lot more too with that, but nevertheless, I've got a certain look that I want, and I need that as part of my repertoire of chart types. Every time I create a chart, these templates are available. And so different approaches here to the template idea. You can easily change the default chart from a clustered column to any of the other chart types that you want. And furthermore, you can have your own collection of templates for frequent use, and you can get to them at any time when you create charts. Two issues that you might have to deal with in working with charts might be what happens when you hide columns or rows in data that's being depicted in a chart, and what happens to blank cells. The chart that we're seeing here to the right of this data represents only data from a few states, and there is a bit of an oddity in it in that some of the cells are blank. So for example, Arizona third quarter 2010 is blank. And how does that display on a line chart? Simply as a gap. Now, if the data is truly accurate, then the chart is truly accurate. If those empty cells represent data that has not yet been reported, we might want to consider an alternative. Do they truly represent 0? We can actually put in the 0 there, but we do have some options. And on the Design tab, if you choose Select Data, it's the fourth button from the left. In the lower left-hand corner of this dialog box, Hidden and Empty Cells. Two separate issues really, but let's deal with the empty cells issue here. Show empty cells as gaps. That's what we're seeing right now. Would we want them to be displayed as 0? Oh, possibly. Let's see how that looks though on a line chart. Let's click OK, and we see what's happened now. And I'm going to press Ctrl Z here for contrast. That's how they looked when we were not showing them as zeros. And this is how they look when they are being shown as zeros. So is that the solution? It could be. Let's click the chart again and go back in on the Design tab to Select Data. Hidden and Empty Cells. How about this third choice? Connect data points with line. Click here, click OK. And watch the difference on the chart when we click OK here. See what's happening? I'll press Ctrl Z to go back for a second. So here they are displayed as 0. And here they are displayed as connecting the points. Now, if Those blank cells represent data that hasn't yet been reported. Then what we're saying in effect is the value here is, for the moment at least, or for a while, is soon to be midway between the two values that surround it. And we see no actual point right here, but that's what's being displayed. Same thing happened over here with Colorado between these two entries. And that's referring to cell G4 up there. So you have to decide what's going to work best for you here in these kinds of situations. Now, if I switch to a bar chart by switching to design and then change chart type, and I'll use a clustered column perhaps, a little bit better maybe. Here we do have the absence of columns, but I think the display here might be more reasonable if you truly want to show these as missing data. So we've got some options there. Now, another issue that in a certain sense isn't really related, but we go to the same dialog box and the same location on the design tab, is what we do with hidden data. Suppose we still want to show this data here, but for the moment we only want to show 2011. So I'm going to hide columns B through E. Drag across, right-click, hide, and we're seeing the data this way. You can see across the bottom, we're only seeing data from 2011. And that's the default view of this. Now, it could be that you might want to show the hidden data and yet simplify the display in the background. So, once again, clicking on the chart, going to the Design tab, select Data, Hidden and Empty Cells, Show Data in Hidden Rows in Columns. And you see immediately what happens in the background here. We are seeing the data for all 8 quarters here. Click OK, even though it's not showing. So maybe you can even hide these. Now, why do we want to hide the data? I think most of the time you wouldn't, but if it's busy and it takes up a lot of room up there, maybe you just don't want to show the data. And now all the numerical data is hidden. In fact, we could even do that for the moment. And if we're only focusing on 3 states here, we're seeing all the data, and yet the numbers are hidden. So at different times, you do want to think out the possibilities here about what's to be done. The default is not to show the hidden data. So if you want to set it back to the default, we can go to the Design tab, select Data, Hidden and Empty Cells, uncheck the box for Show Data in Hidden Columns and Rows, click OK, and what are we about to see on this chart now? Nothing. Not so useful, is it? Bring back the hidden column, so we'll drag across here and double-click the boundary, that's one way, and there's our data again. In this example too, we might eventually consider showing all the states. We'll just grab that lower right-hand corner. It's likely to be a busy chart, and that's not a great chart at all. And here, the design change I think most of us would want to at least explore is changing the chart type here to a stacked column, possibly a stacked bar. Double-click there. And even that probably needs some work too. And here, a better choice might be to switch row column. There we go. And maybe ultimately that could be a better chart. But again, we have methods of dealing with hidden data, and that might happen when we hide rows and columns, or missing data or blank cells. Both of them come from the Select Data button on the Design tab. No matter which method you use to create a chart, adjusting a chart's layout is often the critical step too, and the chart layout options provide you with good quick techniques to complete this vital phase. This clustered column chart here to the right of the data needs a title on top, probably needs a title down the left-hand side, maybe one across the bottom. The legend maybe is placed where I want it to be, maybe not. But what kind of options do we have? There are a lot of extended options by way of the Layout tab, but quite a few choices here. It takes you a long time to do what we want to do relatively quickly. That's on the Layout tab. On the Design tab, and we see the word layout here, so a little bit of confusion possibly. The option called Chart Layouts. Now, because this is a clustered column chart, the drop arrow here for Chart Layouts, there are 11 different options. And just to show that things can vary depending upon chart type, what if we change this chart type to be a line chart? What options do we have there? We've got 12 options there. Now, no matter which chart type we're choosing, these options, which I think at first are a bit hard to figure out what they're doing, most of them are suggesting a title across the top. Now you don't know that at first until you try one of these. Suppose I'll just pick one at random, this one right here. In other words, it gives me space for a chart title. So I click on this and I might type in sales dash 2011 and type enter. I want an axis title over here. So I'll just type in sales in millions. Enter. It didn't give me a title down below, and what happened to the legend? So maybe I didn't make a great choice here. Go back to the drop arrow, choose another one. I want a legend on the right-hand side, so some of these show the legend on the right-hand side. I want a title on top. I want a title on the bottom too. Maybe this one here, how's this one going to look? Unless got some kind of drop lines in it. Maybe I don't want those. Let's try another one. I think you get the idea here. You can find one or another that works best for you. Now that puts in data labels. I could manually take them out, but how about this one? Well, that doesn't show titles on top. In other words, you just have to come to some realization that some of these are going to work better for you than others. And you'll find out eventually some of the things that you need to do can be done manually. Eventually here I'll find perhaps this one here. Doesn't have a title on top. Now maybe I'm picky, or maybe I just don't like the options. In fact, maybe I'll change this back to another type. I might like column better anyway, come to think of it. Go back to column and explore that. Maybe I like this one. Chart title, sales. Over here, millions of dollars. Enter. And maybe, although it says axis title on the bottom here, maybe I don't want a title there. So I'll just press delete. So that could be all I need. And the chart layouts options here give you choices. And again, the choices you get, not always every single one will be to your liking, and you won't see as many choices, or you'll see more choices depending upon the chart type. But it is, for many people, after having created a chart, all they really need to complete the look of the chart. One of the big changes introduced into Excel charting in Excel 2007 was the tremendous expansion of capability regarding color. And when you click a chart, you'll notice on the Design tab, Chart Styles. And initially you'll see 8 choices, but there's a drop arrow over there, and suddenly you'll see 48. Now many times this overlaps your chart, but we can still make quick changes here. And there's so many choices here, some people are just sort of overwhelmed. Again, personal choice here, I like this one here. It gives us sort of a glossy, sort of 3-dimensional look. But you can do this on any chart you want, any type you want. There's a pie chart to the right. You see the pie chart choices there. You'll choose this one, and so on. No matter what the chart type, pick the one that looks best to you. With line charts, I think you'll find that the symbols are probably larger than you want them to be. I know they are for me, but those are adjustments that you can make on the Layout tab or on the Format tab, or many times simply by double-clicking. And we cover that in another movie, but you can easily make those changes as well. Now, if the color selections here aren't to your liking, which you can explore, and this may take some time and it could be a huge tangent, if you go to the Page Layout tab and choose a different theme, and as you slide over some of these themes, you can see the charts in the background changing. You might want to zoom back or in on this before, but as you slide over some of these choices here, the joke is if you're an indecisive person, you're going to have some problems here because the choices seem to just go on and on and on. Now, when you're doing this too, by the way, you're also making font changes. Another reason for doing this might be that maybe these charts are part of a presentation that you're pulling together, and maybe you're also using PowerPoint and Word. You have similar theme choices there too, in fact, the exact same choices. So you might want to be using the same theme in all those different software packages so that your color selections are compatible. So this does create a whole new set of variations, maybe like module here. I've chosen module. Notice how the font changes, more importantly, perhaps the color. But if we go back here to the Design tab, these are not the color choices we saw before. They're quite a bit different. They overlap here and there, but generally different. So you've got some flexibility here as to how you want to use these capabilities. And the main idea here is simply the chart styles, the 48 different options that you have to make your chart look different and perhaps more appealing from your perspective. Sometimes it's preferable to position a chart right next to the source data, but at other times you might want the chart on its own separate sheet, and sometimes the reverse is true. You've got a chart occupying an entire chart sheet, and you've decided that you want to work with it next to the data. move it from there back to a worksheet or any other worksheet for that matter. On the current screen, we're seeing a worksheet with a number of charts on it. And this chart here to the right, you've decided you want it to be on its own sheet. Simply right-click on the chart area and choose Move Chart. We want this to go to a new sheet. There it is, click OK. And it's on its own sheet, and no longer will we find it on the worksheet that it came from. The new sheet will be to the left of the sheet where it came from. Here's that sheet. We no longer see the chart here. Chart to the right, maybe we want to do the same thing there. And of course, you can also do this from the Design tab. It's the rightmost button, Move Chart. There we go. I want to put this on a new sheet, Chart 2. Click OK. The advantage of working with a chart all by itself is it's large, it's clear, it's the only focus we have, we're not seeing any data with it, and it's easier to work with, perhaps. If, however, you decide that this chart's going to work better by having it on the worksheet with the data, or maybe on a totally different worksheet, you can do that as well too. Once again, but this time going in the opposite direction. This chart is here on a sheet by itself. On the Design tab, rightmost button, Move Chart. Let's click it, and let's put it on either the worksheet that has the source data or possibly a new sheet. Now, we don't really want to put it on a new chart sheet. Then we could put it on another data sheet if we wanted to. Put it on the year data sheet, and that's where we had it originally. Click OK, and there it is back here, and that other sheet, that Chart 2 sheet, has disappeared. So it's fast and it's easy, and at different times you might change your mind about the location of a chart. And again, when you select the chart, you can either right-click on the chart area or go to the Move Chart button, the rightmost button, on the Design tab in the Chart Tools ribbon. With a worksheet chart, you can easily resize the chart, move it around as you choose. You can use the Control key, the Shift key, and Alt key for various kinds of creativity in this process. Suppose this chart to the right of the data, I want to move it a little closer to the data maybe. Might want to make it larger or smaller, resize it in a variety of ways. Let's explore some of the options here. Sometimes you want a chart to be bigger or smaller, and at the same time you want to maintain that ratio of height to width. That sometimes is referred to as the aspect ratio. So on this chart here, first of all, if I drag one of the corners, point to the corner and see the double arrow there, if I click and drag, I can make this wider, narrower, smaller, taller, and go anywhere I want. Just sliding the mouse around, left mouse button held down. However, if I hold down the Shift key, and I'm holding it down now, I can only make this chart bigger or smaller and keep that same ratio of height to width. If it is important, I do want to be doing this because I like the look of it, I like the proportions. And be sure to let go of the mouse before the Shift key if you want that ratio to hold. So I'm letting go of the mouse now. So I made the chart somewhat bigger, but I kept that same ratio. Another option, less likely to be used, is the idea that sometimes you want to make a chart wider and yet keep its same height. Sometimes you want to make it shorter and keep the same width. This time, I'm about to drag this right border, and as I'm dragging it, you see how it's going to get wider. No surprises there, but look what happens when I hold down the Control key. It's going to make it wider or narrower as it keeps the same center. So maybe it helps to remember C for center. If you're holding down the Control key and resizing, you're making it wider or narrower if you drag a side handle like this, but you're keeping the same center. Here too, I'll let go of the mouse first. Or maybe I want to make this shorter this way, but I want to keep the same center. And by the way, it's always best here to start the dragging, then hold down the Control. So I'm holding down Control now, and you see what's happening here. Let go of the mouse first. And similarly, dragging from the corner here, if I hold down Control, I'm changing its size around the same center. Now, if you've worked with shapes and objects in PowerPoint or Word or Excel, these are old tips perhaps and you're familiar with them, but just an idea here. I'm holding down Control here, resizing this, keeping the same center. When you actually move a chart around or change its edges, sometimes what you might want to do to make it look a little neater and tidier with regard to the data here on a worksheet. On this chart here, if I'm dragging the left edge here, I can drag it anywhere I want, but suppose I want it to line up perfectly with the cell boundaries there. Hold down the Alt key, and then it's as if the line has like a magnetic attraction to a cell edge. Let go of the mouse here. And it's more efficient to do this on opposite corners because then you take care of two edges at once. I'm about to change the upper right-hand corner here and drag it anywhere I want, but if I hold down Alt, it simply forces the edges to line up with cell boundaries. Let go of the mouse there, and then in the lower left corner, drag this one around, hold down Alt, maybe I'll put it right there, let go of the mouse. And when you click outside of it, you'll see how perfect that is if that's your objective. Maybe I'll do this one here too, Alt key, that sort of thing, line it up that way, and the lower left and so on. And not to turn it into a make work project, but you can see how sometimes you like that look, you like that appearance. One other small issue here with regard to moving charts, sometimes this is important. If you hold down Control and click on a chart, and the term sounds a little funny at first, you will have allowed the chart to be nudged, meaning I'm going to push the right arrow a few times now. I'm moving the chart ever so slightly, now down arrow. I'm not lining up the cell boundaries here, but I'm moving the chart by using the keys on the keyboard. So if you Control click on a chart, you activate those features. So there's no shortage of ways here to move and adjust the placement of charts on worksheets. To enliven a column or a bar chart, or simply to provide some descriptive imaging, you can insert a clip art image or a picture in place of the column or bar. And you can do this with pie charts as well. In this particular worksheet, we've got a pretty simple looking column chart below the data. Instead of having a red column here, let's put in a picture instead. Click the red column, and you might be tempted to go to the Layout tab and choose Picture, and you certainly can do that. And just pick a picture. I'm just picking one of the standard ones out here, say chrysanthemum. This isn't quite what we want because it does use up the entire image of the chart here. So let me press Ctrl Z here. Fastest way to get into this is actually to double click or to right click the series in question. So in place of the red columns here for Europe, why don't we double click the red columns? That takes us into a dialog box. In 2010, double clicking to activate the features of an element is in effect a resurrection of a feature that had been in Excel 2003 and in prior versions, but not in Excel 2007. So simply by double clicking, we activate this dialog box, Format Data Series. Let's use the fill option on the left-hand side. Picture or texture fill. Now something might pop in automatically here. Whoever was using this feature last on this computer used this particular texture. For the moment, that's what's being chosen. We could insert from if we choose File here. And of course, we could look anywhere on any of our drives through this image or that one. How about the koala bear right here? Try this. Insert or double click that. And we see the koala bear in the image there. Now I have no reason for putting a koala bear in this, but if you run a petting zoo and you got koala bears, maybe you want to show that in your column chart. Let's pick something else. File. Chrysanthemum, we tried that earlier in a different sense. This time it will work. You see what's happening there? Maybe you sell flowers. Part of the idea, of course, is to use something that might be pertinent to the business at hand. But let's take a look at clip art. And as usual, we might be spending a long time out here finding just the image we want. We want to show a car. You can use a race car, this one, just to show how this would work. We're ready to insert the car here. For example, just double click it. And it goes right into the image this way. But you'll also notice a choice here called Stack below here. And you see the difference in the image. Let's just click close here. Make this bigger possibly. That's not always the case we need to do. And you can see what's happening here with stacking of the images. Maybe we want to do the different image here for domestic. And again, I'm using images seemingly out of nowhere in a real life situation. I think you'd want to be using images that somehow relate to the particular kind of data being depicted. But it's easy to do. And again, it's just a simple double click or right click on the element in question and Format Data Series, and then use the fill option in Format Data Series. I use this on a column chart. You can see how on the bar chart here to the right of the data, those images are going to be awfully small. Probably wouldn't be a good choice there. And on pie charts, these are usually not good choices as well. I'm going to click on just one of the wedges in the pie chart and then right click here on that wedge Format Data Point. And here too, I think it would be hard pressed to come up with a statement that says we really need to have a picture here. Right now, what popped in there was the car because we had last used that. You know, maybe a flower or something else might look different here, so put in some tulips. But once again, what's the need for that? Here and there makes good sense. Maybe introduce a note of whimsy or something. but at least you have this possibility, and I think more likely to be used in column charts, putting in either clip art or a photo instead of a column. In certain charts, you may want to shift the focus to a high point, a low point, by adding a line or an arrow, possibly a box or a different shape. You might later add text into those shapes as well. Let's click on this chart just to the right of the data here. It's a bar chart. Select the chart, and on the Layout tab in the Chart Tools ribbon, over in the Insert group, Shapes, there's a line, there's an arrow, let's pick an arrow. If you are drawing a line or an arrow, you can start anywhere on the chart, click and drag it anywhere you want. If you happen to be holding down the Shift key, as you do this, it only lets you drag at certain angles. So sometimes that's important. Sometimes you want it to be perfectly horizontal, for example. Draw it anywhere you want. If you are concerned about angles, hold down that Shift key, but be sure to let go of the mouse first. And once it's drawn, you can drag either edge if you want to change the angle. Do that with it. But notice at the same time, because this is an object, a Format tab is active in the ribbon. And over here, for example, under Shape Styles, we might want to choose one of these options. And as I'm sliding over these, you can see what's happening to that arrow. So we'll pick one of those. We might like something like that. So that's an arrow. And again, we might be pointing to a high value. That's often the case. Something like that. Later we'll put in a box maybe. Or at this point, go back to the Layout tab, back to Shapes, put in a box. Doesn't have to be a box exactly. It could be any of these shapes. I can't think of a good reason necessarily to use a hexagon, but we could do that too. And if you've worked with these in PowerPoint and Word or possibly Excel, you know that if you hold down the Shift key, whatever shape you're drawing here is a so-called perfect shape, provided you let go of the mouse first. And again, I can't give you a strong reason as to why I would want to use a hexagon there. Maybe it's somehow related to the company logo. Later, you might want to right-click on that and add some text. Put it at the end of the arrow somewhere up here. Maybe shrink it first. If you are shrinking it or changing its size, if you drag a corner handle, as they're called here, hold down the Shift key. If you want to keep the same proportion of height to width, again, let go of the mouse first. And at different times in using these shapes for different reasons, when you are creating them, suppose you want to add another one here, I'll go out once again to the Layout tab, Insert Shapes. Just pick another shape for an example here. Here's one here. Once again, hold down Shift to make it a perfect shape. If you're holding down the Control key, by the way, it creates the shape from wherever you started outward, so that has a different effect too. So any number of these could be used. There are quite a few of them. Again, I think it's nobody's objective here to try and use all of them, but quite a few of them here. And in a later movie, we'll show you how to put text inside these boxes as well. So here and there, used for annotation purposes, you can add lines, boxes, arrows, and other capabilities from this huge menu on the Shapes button on the Layout tab. If you need to add an explanation to a chart to explain why a value is so high or so low, or you want to raise a question or simply add your own free-floating text, you can do this on any chart from the Layout tab. I'm going to click on the chart just to the right of the data here. Layout tab. You'll see text box. This is one option. Let's click this. And then on the chart, and no particular location, maybe just click here. We want to put out a word of congratulations to Jim here, who's the manager of this group, for example, and say, "Good job, Jim," or something like that. And simply click outside that. Now, it really is associated with a box, even though we don't see it. If you happen to click back there, you'll see the text. I think one thing we probably want to do here is click the border of it. And then on the Home tab, for example, we can make the text bigger. As I'm sliding over the numbers here, you see what's happening to the text. Possibly that. And we can move this around, of course. And we can resize this to look like that. If we want the actual box to have a background in it, we can click on the Format tab. It's a drawing tool ribbon edition up there. We might fill in the background with this color, that color, whatever. Easy to do and fast. And you can also do this with other symbols found on the Layout tab over in the Insert group under Shapes. Handpick any of these shapes that encompass some space. Here's a pentagon. Pop it in there. Right-click on it. Says Edit Text, even though there's nothing there yet. And maybe we'll want to say Outstanding Totals for June. Something like that. There looks a little bit strange because of word wrap. Make it bigger, smaller, whatever. And once again, when you select the border here, You have a number of tools available in the Home tab, quite a few on the Layout tab as well. Probably want it centered this way, put in top, bottom, that sort of thing, all kinds of different things. Maybe we want the color of the box to be different, or translucent, move it around. Associate it with arrows as well. If you wish, you want to add those too. Either for explanations or just putting in comments like this. You can do these on any of the charts here. And again, the process begins simply on the Layout tab, starting with shapes and/or text box. The text, as I mentioned too, could be free-floating, so just one more quick time on this here. Text box, just click and start typing anything you want. We don't necessarily need to put it in a box. So we might just say here, regional sales. In fact, in a certain sense, you could use this in place of a main title if you wish. Now that this is probably a little bit more work to make that work properly for that feature, but temporarily here I'm using it for that reason, but we could make it larger and do all the things you're familiar with doing in manipulating text off the Home tab. So good quick ways to add boxes, along with other arrows and features to a chart for explanatory or congratulatory reasons. At different times when working with charts, you need to add titles, you need to edit existing titles, or sometimes even remove titles. Probably the best way to deal with titles is just after you've created the chart. On the Design tab, explore some of the options under Chart Layouts. Now, sometimes you don't use these because some of them just don't fit your particular needs. Or sometimes you inherit a chart, you've copied a chart. How do you add a title strictly focusing on the title and placing it where you want it to be? Use the Layout tab in the ribbon, Chart Title. First two options, once we try one or the other immediately, we can see the difference. Centered Overlay Title. In other words, it doesn't move the plot area at all. The title will overlap the top. That might be what you want. How about the other choice? Above Chart, possibly here. In either case, no matter which one you've chosen, now is the time to type in the title. So it doesn't necessarily have to reflect what's on the worksheet, but presumably it's a description of the data. So maybe this is going to say, for example, 2011 dash annual sales or sales for a certain region, that sort of thing. As you're typing, you will see the data in the formula bar, but you don't see it on the chart until you press enter. So it looks like that. Now it is in a box. You can format that if you wish off the Format tab, or possibly go to the Home tab and choose a different font size if you wish to see what's happening here. You can certainly adjust that, choose a different font. All those many choices out there you could explore just as easily if you want to make changes there. Click outside of it. At a later time, or maybe it's the first time you're seeing it, sometimes you want to change the content, so we might just click here. Maybe we want to indicate that this is sales throughout the world or international. Click in front of the S, for example. Maybe we'll type in worldwide or total, whatever. Click outside and make both W's capitalized, whatever it is you want to do there. If you want it to be a 2-line, 3-line title, as you click here and then click again, you could press enter at a certain point here. That may not be the best display, but you have that option. How about after the W up there, take out the hyphens? You can do that as you wish. So you're in complete control of the title. You can move it anywhere you want. And at any time when you want to get rid of it, of course, just click on and press delete. So you do have control over the main title. Again, keep in mind that idea that if you've just created the chart, it might be a bit faster if you've become familiar with the chart layout types to go down that way to position your title. But certainly at different times, you will need to go to the Layout tab and use some of the chart title options. You can add vertical and horizontal titles located on the left and bottom sides of a chart by using the multiple options available from the Axis Title button on the Layout tab. So on this particular chart, it's practically mandatory to have a title down the left-hand side that explains what these numbers mean. And although less important, sometimes you want to have a horizontal title across the bottom of the chart. Suppose you want to explore both of these. The chart's been selected on the Layout tab in the ribbon. In the Labels group here, Axis Titles. Let's say for the moment we're thinking about the left-hand side there. That's a vertical axis. Got a few options here. Before putting in the text, let's just explore the options. How about a rotated title? This is probably the most common of the three choices. We want this to say, in effect, sales in millions or millions of dollars, something like that. And you can imagine how the text would appear. Another option here under Axis Titles, vertical title. And this is not a favorite of most people. If the text is short, that's probably okay, but longer text, often it doesn't fit and it is more difficult to read. And a third choice up here, axis titles vertical, horizontal title, even though it's on the vertical axis. And this too isn't going to work so well, particularly if the text is very long, but it does have its uses here and there. I'm going to go back to axis titles and choose under primary vertical axis, rotated title, and just put in, for example, millions of dollars. Now, presumably, I might have the word sales either in the main chart title or in the horizontal title at the bottom. Certainly could put it in here if I wanted to. And because I chose the rotated option, as I press enter here, we see what's happened to the text here on the left-hand side on the primary vertical axis. How about data below the chart? Probably not often as necessary as this one is likely to be, but certainly at times you want that. Axis titles, primary horizontal. And only one real choice here, title below axis. And maybe we just want to put in, for example, the year, something that we could have put in and might want to put in a chart title, but you can choose to put whatever titles you want where you want to put them. So maybe here we want to put in 2011 sales by month. Perhaps that's obvious, but still, sometimes we say the obvious in our titles and at some point press enter and we see the title there. And in both situations here, of course, at different times, you might want to get rid of these and start over or edit them. And so if we want to edit this, for example, the lower title here might just click in there, click in front of month and put in current month. Something like that. In other words, just the idea that you can edit this text as you wish. On both of these choices too, you might have missed another choice in using the axis titles options. Say on horizontal, both here and on vertical title, if you make these choices more primary horizontal axis title options, or in the other case, more primary vertical, this simply leads you into some formatting choices which you might want to explore as well. Things that you possibly might get to off the home tab as well. So 2 different ways here to approach the idea of adding titles, sometimes horizontal titles across the bottom, and sometimes vertical titles along the vertical axis on the left-hand side of a chart. Instead of typing, say, a main title or any other title on this particular chart, you can link a chart title directly to cells in the worksheet. Let's imagine here that the main chart title here might as well be the same data that we see in that cell A1, Two Trees Olive Oil Company. That's a merged cell, but that's okay. So how do we add a title? After selecting the chart, Layout tab, in the Labels group, Chart Title. How about a title above the chart? And there we see the text. Now, without actually clicking in the formula bar, watch what happens as I type equal. You see the equal sign in the formula bar. And now I'm going to click on cell A1 and simply press enter. And so that data is about to appear as the chart title. There it is right there. And in similar fashion, I might want to put in a title for the primary vertical axis here. So on the Axis Titles button, in that Labels group on the Layout tab, primary vertical axis title, a rotated title, this time equal, click on cell A2, and press enter. So we're picking up data from the worksheet, saving us some typing, and getting the appropriate information that we want in the chart. I don't have any other data on the chart that I might want to put in the title below this, so perhaps we won't use it there, but you can see how easy this is to do. And if you make editing choices here, in either of these cells, of course, you might expect the label here to change. So if we change this from worldwide to international or total, something like that, as soon as I make the change here and press enter, the chart will react. And you can see the title here has changed also. So we can have our titles directly tied to worksheet data. With mixed data containing widely divergent values, sometimes charts can appear distorted or even illegible. There is an adjustment that allows you to have a different vertical axis on the left side than you do on the right side. And I think this is best shown by an example. Let's take a look at the data here on this sheet called column line. Perhaps this represents some vehicles that you have in your organization. You're tracking miles traveled per month and also miles per gallon. If we simply click on any one cell in here and press Alt F1, we've got a chart. But I think almost immediately we see that something is a little bit off here. We can see the miles here being plotted, and we can see how it matches up with the data in column B. But how about miles per gallon? It's in the legend red box, but where's the red box? As you look at the numbers, you can begin to think what's happening here. Those miles per gallon numbers are what, 10, 20, 30 in that general range? And the first horizontal grid line we have above 0 here is 1,000. How are we supposed to see numbers like that? So the miles per gallon actually are on the chart, but we can't see them. Now, if we could somehow show them and read off the right axis, which we don't yet have, this is the workaround. And the first trick, and it's not really a trick, it's a technique, we need to be able to select this series called MPG. So on the Layout tab, the leftmost group is called Current Selection. And the drop arrow here that might say Chart Area or Plot Area depends upon where you have clicked before going here. If we click the drop arrow, we'll see all selectable elements in this chart, and we want to go to and select Series MPG. Now as I click here, watch column C be selected, so we have selected the series. And when you look on the chart, you see it's selected as well. But you really could never have actually clicked on it because it's so tiny. But once it has been selected, then we can go to the choice just below this, Format Selection. And what we want to do almost immediately is choose Secondary Axis. There we go. And you can see already what's happened on the chart. Let's just close this. Then we're not quite there yet, but now it's starting to make a little bit of sense. Unfortunately, the columns are overlapping one another, but the red columns that we're seeing represent miles per gallon, and we're reading that off the right side. Now, the best next alternative is to take that series, which is still currently selected, and turn that series into a line chart. So you can mix chart types. This is probably the most common type of mixed chart types. Let's go to the Design tab, change the chart type. Now remember, we're not changing the entire chart. We're changing just the selected range to be a line chart right here with markers. Double click it a little bit faster. Now it's starting to make some real sense. We can change the colors and spiff it up a little bit. But now, with only a brief explanation necessary, we can say, as we look at the data, the blue columns represent miles driven in any given month, and we read that off the left vertical axis. The lines and the boxes represent miles per gallon for any given month. We read that off the right axis. Notice that the tick marks don't quite line up, and although not critical, we could rescale the right axis here simply by double-clicking it. And then on the axis options here, maybe changing the maximum here to be 50, possibly. It will cause those numbers to line up a little more evenly. That may be more than we need to do, and I'll just press enter after changing the fixed maximum to be 50. So now we see it's something like this. So at this point, there's a direct ratio between the numbers on the right and the numbers on the left, even though they're not exact. So I think you can see how this can work in your favor. Longtime users of Excel charts were a little disappointed in Excel 2007 when the term combination chart was no longer available as a chart type. But in effect, you can create your own combination charts using different types. And that's what I did in this example here to show you how you can relate numbers of widely divergent scope on the same chart using multiple axes. Tick marks are the tiny little indicators that appear along axes. In this particular column chart here, we see them between the months across the bottom, the horizontal axis here. I think many times you simply ignore them. They don't get in the way. Occasionally, you do want to have some control over them. They also appear on vertical axes, but in the example here, they do match up with the grid line, so you're hardly aware of them. On a different sheet here called Line Chart, on this line chart, there's a feature active called Drop Lines, which is covered in another movie. However, they match up with the dates, which is probably what you want. The tick marks don't. So we do have some control over this. Now, selecting the axis sometimes is a little tricky. You might click here, and have we selected the axis? Well, on the Layout tab, that leftmost group called Current Selection does have a drop arrow, and you can't quite click on that axis prior to double-clicking to get into a dialog box. You can click this drop arrow and choose the axis we're talking about here, the horizontal category axis. And then from there, you can jump right into Format Selection. Then you don't have to worry about double-clicking somewhere. And we see some choices in here for tick marks. Right now, major tick mark type outside. Let's change that possibly to be inside. Keep your eye on those tick marks to the left. And you see how they're now inside the actual plot area. And the other choice might be cross, and there it crosses. But maybe more important to you is the position of the tick marks. And then the last two choices here, the two opposite choices on the tick marks. Watch the difference now. There we say them between tick marks. Of course, if you don't want them at all, ignore these choices and then come back here and choose none. And in certain kinds of charts, you might want to have minor tick marks as well. We certainly wouldn't need them here. And when you're looking at different charts at different times, be aware of these possibilities. Now, sometimes when you change a chart, maybe this one, maybe another one, we might want to change this to be a bar chart. So let's go to Design, change chart type. How about a horizontal bar chart here? And we've got tick marks here as well too. But maybe not so much tick marks are we concerned about, but the actual placement of the data itself. In other words, if we look at the months as we see them here and look at the data, I think a lot of us, so isn't this upside down? Here's January 09 at the very bottom. We're seeing every other month. We'll get to that issue in a bit, but we're also seeing these upside down compared with the data. So this time we want to choose the vertical axis. And on the Layout tab, if we can't quite click on it so easily, we'll make this choice again, that left arrow there, the vertical category axis here, as it's called, and then Format Selection. And the tick marks, of course, we can adjust those, but while we're here, let's take a look at this option called Dates in Reverse Order. Click this, watch the chart. And now the top-down order here matches the data that we see over in column A. Now, you may or may not like the titles up top appearing there. Clicking there, the dialog box reacts the axis labels. And this says Next Axis. Now, you would think choosing low means what? Put these below the data? It doesn't change it at all. How about high? I think that is exactly something we would call non-intuitive, maybe even anti-intuitive. But we see the labels below this. Now, these are related to the tick marks that we talked about as well, too. You see how they're playing out. So even though we introduced this section as being something on tick marks, and it also includes the whole idea of how you control the labels that accompany the tick marks in certain charts. When the chart axis contains numerical information, like in the example on this column chart right here, in general, the formatting that you see in the chart matches the formatting in the source data. In fact, you might think they're always in sync, because if we were to make a change to this data, maybe eventually we will be needing decimal points here as we plug in actual data as opposed to projected data. I'm going to change the format here on the Home tab by putting in the comma and then decreasing the decimals here. And we already are seeing on the chart how the numbers are changing, and watch them change again. Now, the reverse is not true. We can change the actual chart format, and that does not change the source data. And so we wouldn't want to see the zeros here. So how can we make a change? A couple of different ways. Probably the fastest way is simply double-click the axis. And that brings up the appropriate dialog box, Format Axis, choose Number, and pick a style here that doesn't include decimal places. Maybe we'll adjust that, put in 0. We haven't reached 1,000, but eventually we could, so leave that in place perhaps. We're all set here, close. And so the display is different. And now if we happen to change these, we wouldn't add $signs probably, but if we did that anyway, you see how this is not causing any change in the chart? Let me undo that one. Now, similarly in other charts, for example, a line chart here on this different worksheet, here the issue could be twofold. One is the dates, nothing really wrong with these, but you might want to have full spellings of the months here and yet not make that change in the data. So once again, double-clicking along the horizontal axis in the bottom here, double-click and simply choose in this Format Axis dialog box, the Number tab. And we'll use a date option here that uses the full spelling of the month. There we go, right here. And immediately you see what's happened in the chart. So possibly that's a choice you might want to make. Sometimes you might be going in the opposite direction. Now, what about the vertical titles along the left-hand side here? Wouldn't it be nice here if we had 25 and 20 and 15 and 10 and 5 and so on? These would be a lot easier to read. So let's select that. And then choose Layout in the ribbon. And then Axes, Primary Vertical Axis. And we see some choices here. Now, unfortunately, at the moment it's overlapping, but we'll see pretty quickly what's happening here. Show axis in millions. There we go, that's a lot more readable. And for this label right here, we might want to expand it a little bit. Say sales in millions, profits in millions, whatever it might be, just click in there. Space, IN, space, there we go, and enter. And maybe move that around a little bit, resize it and so on. All the things we might do, click outside of it, move it around as needed. So that's more readable and we're not flooded with zeros up there. Different ways to control the numeric formatting in a chart. Anytime you need to change the numeric format of an axis entry in Excel, simply by double-clicking that portion of the chart, as we saw, it activates the Format Axis dialog box and you can use the number option. And there's that special choice for certain millions that we just saw also. After selecting the area, on the Layout tab, choose Axes and explore some of the choices there. Although most charts should contain legends to help explain what chart elements refer to, you need to know how to remove a legend, how to add a legend on those charts that don't have them. Edit or reposition legends within a chart as well. Pretty easy stuff here, and you can achieve these objectives a couple different ways. In this chart, there's a legend on the right-hand side, and that's just fine. That's the default location. I think that's where we're used to seeing a legend. However, if we select this chart and go to the Layout tab, we can choose the option Legend, and instead of showing it on the right, show it on top. Sometimes that looks better. Personal choice, of course, on the left. And without going through every single one, as you get the idea, you might notice the last two here. Overlay, legend at right. Certainly not a good choice here. Overlay on the left, maybe more so. No matter where the legend does end up, you can click and drag it. We could have done that from the beginning before even going into the menu, but you can click and drag this. Usually just click on it, drag a border, put it where you want. And if you want to leave it there, that's fine. A good follow-up on this would be to give it a background color. Zip out to the Format tab, perhaps choose one of these options, pop a color on it, there we go. And if you have to see those ahead of time, you can certainly do this, drag it around and explore what those might look like. So easy to handle. If the legend is larger, if it encompasses more entries than this one, sometimes what you'll want to do too, possibly, is resize this. If we had 4 entries there, it might do this, or stack them up 2 by 2 and so on, so you can resize the legend as well. And you can certainly get rid of a legend just by clicking on it and pressing delete. Again, most of the time you probably do want a legend, but there are certain pie charts when you might have applied data labels, even bar charts, where the labeling contains all the information that the legend might, so that's easily added. And if we simply want to add a legend right after we create a chart, it's not a bad idea to go to the Design tab and choose one of the chart layout options that has legends in it, and at the same time pick up on the titles as well. Many of these have legends on the right-hand side. After you get used to this particular feature, you recognize some that have the legend on the bottom too, for example, this one. So you see different options there, different ways to control the placement of a legend on a chart. Trying to interpret the value of each color segment in this stacked column chart here is a little tricky, not so accurate. We can add to this chart what are called data labels. The actual values of each piece, these columns, could be displayed right on the columns. These are called data labels. Let's select the chart here, and on the Layout tab, in the Labels group, Data Labels. The 3 choices here, center, inside end, and inside base, are really about the positioning of the labels. Let's just choose one of them, for example, center. I think a lot of people would agree that's pretty crowded there, and do we really need to see all those numbers? Well, here and there, maybe you do. And how is this going to play out on the different chart type? For example, a clustered column chart. Going to the Design tab in the ribbon, the leftmost button, change chart type, clustered column. And I think here you would agree that's practically uninterpretable, if that's the word. We can't see where the numbers apply. A not so obvious alternative to this, and you would have to have the need to actually do this, is to have the data labels be applied to only one series. So if we were to click just the blue columns here and go back to the Layout tab and choose Data Labels, we could first choose None. And by choosing None, we take the labels off of just that series. We'd have to click the other series and choose None, and then the third series. Now I could have done that more efficiently by not having selected any series, but we're back to this stage. So once again, clicking the blue columns here, Data Labels. How about inside end? Different approach there. Or another alternative there, outside in probably better in this example here, so we're showing these only for the blue series, the domestic series. Another approach here is to say, I only want these numbers on 2 or 3 of the columns. So let's remove the data labels, choose none, and then pick, for example, this highest one. Now you have to click the series first. In other words, click one of them. The entire series is selected. Pause for just about a second, click that one again, and we've selected only a single point. And by the way, for reinforcement on that, you'll notice in the current selection group on the layout tab, the left button will say series, domestic, point, or Europe or Asia in this example here. So we've selected only one point. Come back to data labels, and maybe we'll put a label for that location only. And of course, we could do this for other columns as well, one by one, so that's another option to consider there. Let's remove these. And you might be using other kinds of charts as well, possibly a line chart. And if we went to a line chart, I think here too, you might have some issues regarding how clearly these labels are going to appear here. And I think you can sense ahead of time if we apply data labels to every point here, it's going to be a bit of a disaster. So on the layout tab, choosing data labels, and let's just choose above. That seems like would be the best choice perhaps, but you see what's going on there. Not a great choice. And here too, you might either want to show fewer months in the example or just apply this to one series only. And how might this look if we switch the chart type to a pie chart? I'll use the 2D pie right here. This is a reminder too why we sometimes frown on using pie charts when they have more than 5 or 6 sectors. It's going to be a bit tricky to read. Will the data labels help here? Well, yes, they should. On the layout tab, back to data labels, maybe on the center, and you can explore where you want to put them here. I think maybe that might be a better choice, where possibly outside the end is another choice. And similarly, if we change the design of this to a 3D pie chart, and of course we can make that be more 3D, we can rotate it, we can do some other things with it here. But let's look at some of the options here, because in this example here, what you might want to do with these is include percentages, even if they're not part of the actual data displayed to the left of the chart there. In this case, layout tab, data labels. And again, the choices here are about the positioning, but let's go to more data label options. And this brings up this dialog box. Would we want to add the percentage? Well, you might, and at the same time, you might want to not show value. That's certainly an option. And you also have the choice of showing the category name. And in this case, this is likely to be in the legend. One option is to say, well, let's do this, and then let's get rid of the legend. Probably wouldn't want them both. The series name, you'll see immediately is redundant, so you wouldn't want that. So it's a question of which combination of these do you want, and do you want the legend? You'll also notice a choice that's there by default, show leader lines. And here we see them, but you don't always see them. And you might say, well, why don't we have one for November? Well, it's not needed. But if you take, for example, just November here and drag it out like this, you will see leader lines. Now, that looks like a make-work project for some people, but here and there, when you're using pie charts, by manipulating these choices that we've just seen, you're going to have some good labeling potential here. But again, pie charts are somewhat difficult to read. If we do click away from the chart and then back on it again, another possibility here is to go into some of the 3D format choices, 3D rotation, this sort of thing, change the perspective on it. And again, every time you do that, the labels start moving around. So I think the better approach here is decide how you want the actual pie to look and then apply the labels. But there's no shortage of options here for applying labels to any different kind of chart that you might be using. When you're working with a chart that's on its own sheet, or when you're working with a chart that's far removed from the data on the current worksheet, you might want to add to your chart a feature called a data table, which essentially shows the source data. Let's apply one to this chart here, and I think you'd probably agree that you wouldn't really need it here because the data is right next to the chart. Selecting the chart and then going to the Layout tab, the feature is called Data Table. And we can show it with legend or without. Let's show the two examples here, show data table. And we see what's happening. And you can imagine with certain size numbers, this may not be so good unless you make it wider, or in some cases maybe really wide enough. I make this narrower because maybe that was the original chart size. You see what's happening to the data table, not so good there. So you should experiment with this feature. Now, if we have other charts on this worksheet and maybe this chart is far off to the right and not near the data, perhaps this makes some sense. And certainly if this chart is by itself, on another sheet. At any time, you can right-click on a chart and move it. And sometimes it does make sense to work with a chart on its own sheet. I'll put it on a new sheet here. And here, since we don't have the data nearby, it might make sense to have a data table on this. We might be printing this or using it during a demonstration, and it would be helpful to see those values there. Well, it's a bit tough to read for an audience from certain distances. I'm going to move this back again just as a reminder that you can do that right-click and move the chart and put it back on that sheet that it came from, year data. There we go, so we moved it back here. Now this works on many chart types, but not all. If we were to switch the design here of this chart to a pie chart, either pie chart, it's not available there. And if you click the layout tab, you'll see that it's not selectable. But on line charts, bar charts, column charts, area charts, and a number of other types, you will have the ability to add what's called a data table. And here and there with certain large amounts, as we suggested, this is not very viable. But it does make sense in some situations. You can easily add what's called a data table to emphasize the chart's source data, share the data right with the chart. When you create a chart, Excel uses what is called automatic scaling for the axis values. On this chart, we see that the scale goes to 350. Now, I think most users most of the time simply don't care to change that, but you can change it, and for a variety of different reasons. One reason might simply be you want more open space above the columns here, just to give it a more open look. You can certainly do that at any time. You also have control over the spacing between the grid lines that you might want to show on the chart as well. Or you want to start the base entry at something above 0, although we'll show you why you might not want to do that as well. I'm going to make just a small change to the data here. The June value is 330. I'm going to change it to be 335. As I press enter, watch the axis on the left side of the chart. It's currently topping out at 350. Now it goes to 400. Now, if I don't like that, what I might want to do is just double click here, or another approach, go to the layout tab and actually take a look at the axes options here. This is the primary vertical axis. Now here we could use other kinds of features, but I think really what we want to do here is go right into these choices here. So it certainly would have been faster to do a double click, but it is a reminder there are some settings here. And by clicking here, we'll come to this dialog box, and you'll notice that the axis options are set to auto. Let's change the maximum here to be fixed, and I want it to go to 350 the way it was before, because the highest value is below that. Now it will change the look of the charts, and let's just say I've decided that's going to look good. And by the way, if you don't want to close the dialog box, maybe just click on another option here. I'll just click up here on the word auto above this. And now we see the changes, the dialog box stays open. Now, some people say, well, I want it to go to 375. Here and there, when you choose certain numbers, you'll get different kinds of scaling that might surprise you, and the intervals might be different as well. And you see what's happening here? It shows every 50, but it starts at -25. I think most people probably wouldn't want this. That's a little bit unorthodox. I think you'd have your audience, if they're watching this, scratching their head saying, why did you do that? So kick this around a little bit. I think what makes sense here, the choice either 350 or 400 if you want to set it manually. Now remember, it went to 400 automatically. So if you simply set it back to auto, you see what's happening on the chart. So again, you have your needs. Now, something I hinted at, and I want to show you why you might do it, and on the other hand, why you shouldn't do this. I've seen this done with column charts, and it's particularly bad because it gives a very misleading message. But here's the rationale behind what I had suggested. Suppose you're looking at this chart and you're saying, these columns, they all start well above 100. Why don't we just make the chart start at 100? So for the minimum here, I'm going to click on Fixed and change that value to be 100. Click on the word auto below it over here. Now look at the chart. Now you can always make the fallback excuse that says, well, can't you read the numbers on the left-hand side? But particularly if you're looking at March, your eye is telling you that the sales, the blue column, is 3 times as large as the expenses. You can see that column is exactly 3 times higher. But how about the value? That's 250. And this is 150. Obviously, that isn't 3 times as big. And I've seen this done at different times. The general rule would be column charts should never start above 0. And let me show you another example of how you might have used this in here and even might make some more sense. But again, it's not the thing to do. In this chart right here, you could again make the case for saying, well, we can't read the differences that well, so why don't we just start the chart at 700? So it's simply double clicking on the axis here, and I'll move this over so we can see what's about to happen. I'm going to change the minimum value here to be 700. We can still see all the columns. So it does delineate or express or show the differences perhaps a bit better. But again, we have this oddity. Look at March. Is this entry 3 times bigger than this? The yellow column is 850. The green is 750. So our eye is telling us one thing, and the actual data means something else. Now, strangely enough, if you turn this into a line chart, it seems not to be as awkward. In fact, you can make a case for saying it's okay. But I think you do owe your audience an explanation when you do this. This doesn't start at 0. But for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to suggest volume in quite the same way that a column chart does. We're looking at the same data, and it is starting above 0. But you see how this is reading out? It does accentuate the change more so than had we used a scale of 0. So if I were to double click the left axis here and change the minimum to be automatic, you see what happens when it starts at 0? It makes for a pretty boring chart, and it looks like sales and expenses are real close together. Doesn't do a good job of showing the differences. So I think you can see how easy it might be to want to show the scaling start above 0. And as I press Ctrl Z here to undo, close this dialog box first, press Ctrl Z. I think you could see how on a line chart, maybe that's acceptable, but going back again with Ctrl Z on a column chart, not acceptable because of the way we read these. There will be times too when you're creating charts, a scatter chart, like the example we see here, times might get involved. And I think you can see based on the data here, this starts in the morning at 8 a.m. roughly and ends at around 6 p.m. We've got sale amounts made throughout the day. Maybe this company sells large items, but not that many. And we're trying to track sales activity here. So what do we need to do with the lower axis here? It has times of day on it. If you were to double click this axis, as I'm about to do right here, you'll see some funny looking numbers and potential choices out here. It says auto. Well, digressing slightly here, you'd have to know and recognize the times of day, no matter how they're displayed, are actually values between 0 and 1. And 8 a.m. is roughly a third of the day in. So if we change the minimum here to be about a third, 0.3 here, and I'll click on the word auto below it so you can watch the chart change. How it starts at 8 a.m. and at this data here ends around 6 p.m. That's about 3/4 of the way through the day. Let's change the maximum here to be 0.75. 0.75 represents 3/4 of the day. I'll click on the word auto here. There we go. And we're seeing this. Now what happened here, I didn't really mean to change it back to auto, change it to fixed. So now we see the range between 8 a.m. and the display here of 1800. And if it makes more sense to you at this point to change this to be AM, PM, we can certainly double click down here and then activate the number tab in the Format Access dialog box. And instead of choosing this kind of time, how about the one with the AM, PM in it? And we'll do a close. There we go, and that's adjusted. And similarly, sometimes you might have to adjust this top and bottom too, but in this case, it looks okay. So now, after adjusting the axis here, we can read what's happened here throughout the day. At different times of day we made sales. We see how that breaks out by time and by dollar amount. So for a variety of reasons, you might need to adjust the axis scaling in a chart. Excel gives us numerous ways to approach this. Grid lines are designed to improve the readability of values in charts. Sometimes you might want to enhance them by including minor grid lines as well, or possibly changing the thickness of them. An example we're seeing here on this worksheet called Profits, I think the grid lines are too prominent, too dark. And at different times you might want to make changes. If that's the only change to be made here, a quick fix is simply to double click on one of the grid lines. And although that's a little tricky sometimes to select, if it is, just select the chart and then in the ribbon choose Layout, and the leftmost button has its drop arrow. You can select the major grid lines from there. At that point, click Format Selection. Now certainly if we had double clicked, we could get here a lot faster. What are we talking about here? The possibility of a different color. The black is fairly strong there. How about a dark gray? How's that going to show up? And you see what's happening on the chart. Not quite dark enough. How about another gray? And so on. Don't make them too obvious, but at the same time, you want to make them workable. Now, if you don't have any grid lines at all, or you might want to add minor grid lines, on the Layout tab, you have a choice called Grid Lines in the Axis group here. With some choices, we're talking about the horizontal grid lines here. Major lines are already there. Minor ones, we could add those like this. Doesn't look so good, does it? You can't differentiate which lines are which. Let's go back here again on the primary horizontal grid lines and choose major and minor grid lines. That doesn't change it either, but if we take the grid lines off and then come back to grid lines, primary horizontal grid lines, major and minor, we do see both sets. If you had done this from the beginning, you would see a differentiation here. So what might we want to do now? Let's simply double click one of the major ones. So one option is to double click one of the major ones and make that be slightly darker. And let's just dark gray and not so dark gray in the background. And you can imagine the reverse of this would be, I'm going to press Ctrl Z to undo for the moment. We could take one of the minor grid lines here, double click it, and then make that line, a solid line, a lighter gray. So I think you get the idea here, how you want to work back and forth with major and minor grid lines. And of course, the real purpose of this is you're trying to read the values as you look at the different points. Now, on a different chart, on a different sheet here, city sales, you will encounter, of course, bar charts from time to time, and perhaps you use them heavily. Sometimes you're thinking about the lines, but also about the breakpoints here, which may or may not make sense in the example being shown. So in this particular chart, let's choose Layout, and then go to Grid Lines. This time we're talking about vertical grid lines in this kind of a chart. Maybe we'll add both. Now that might be more lines than we actually need. It doesn't make any difference here. If we change the points, we have control over these breakpoints here. Here they're shown every 2500. Is that too many or is that not enough? Is that too wide of a gap? A good choice here might be, let's get rid of the minor grid lines. So grid lines here, primary vertical grid lines, maybe choose major only, and the minor ones are gone. And then if we want to control the actual spacing here, you can double click on simply the values outside here, double click here, and let's just change the major unit. It's currently 2500, maybe make it 5000, see how that looks. And we could click outside here or just happen to click the word fixed again. We see what's happened to the chart now. Maybe that's easier. If we want to put in minor grid lines, we could escape from here, come out, add those under vertical. And for the moment, again, we've got no differentiation between the two. The same thing we do with the prior chart you might want to do now. But just remember, you've got control over the placement of the grid lines, their thickness, and their colors. And in varying degrees, you're trying to make charts more readable by sensible use of grid lines. A significant analytical tool that comes with charting is your ability to create and sense something's brand new, a trend line that shows not only what this data is doing, but where it might be headed if you extend it into future timeframes. The trend line can be applied to a variety of different charts. It's often applied to a line chart or a column chart. One example of a trend line could be a moving average. In the example here, we're looking at sales entries. You probably have seen stock charts that show a lot of up and down activity. A moving average, perhaps starting at the third point, and showing an average of every 3 months might make sense here. At any point on the line here, right-click and add trend line. And what we see in the background before we even make a choice is what's called a linear trend line. Now, for this to ultimately make some sense, you'd have to have a little bit of knowledge of what a regression line is. And for the moment, I'll hold off on that. Do recognize that one of the trend line options is called a moving average, and the default is set up at 2. Let's take a look at what we see there on the chart. We see a new line. We could certainly make it thicker, make changes to it. It actually begins at the second point. Now, early on, it doesn't seem to be doing much. But at any given point here, say the one right here for June 09, this point here is the average of the previous month and the current month. So it's the average of the point above it and the one that precedes it to the left. And the idea behind a moving average is that it smooths out the curve and perhaps is a better representation of what's happened over time. Back in the dialog box here, if I make the 2 become 3, see what's happening? And of course, as I raise this value, the starting point of the chart moves right where now it's starting at the 3rd point. The more we raise this number, the smoother the line gets. And you've seen perhaps charts like this that cover a huge amount of time, maybe years even, and this makes some sense here and there for certain kinds of trend lines. Now, going back to linear again, associated with this regression line is an r-squared value, and I'm hard-pressed to give you a full explanation of this, but let's just say that the r-squared value, if it approaches 1, and in the example here it's 0.8, the more it approaches 1, the more presumably the data is consistent or closer to the straight line. I know that's a loose definition. For those of you who are statisticians, you probably have a better sense of what this means. But in trying to support where this data might be going, we can extend this. The closer this value is to 1, the better argument you have for using that particular feature. So I'm going to jump back here again and double click on the line here to come back into the trend line options. Let's extend this forward. And by the way, displaying the equation on a chart is again something that you might use if you're familiar with regression analysis and you know how to use that formula. I'm going to uncheck it, but just recognize that's a possibility as well too. How about a forecast? Let's forecast this forward 6 periods. And as soon as I click somewhere else here, you see what's happened. No, there's no points associated with it, but at least we can see where that's going based on the existing data. How about 10? You can see that. A different kind of regression line, one based on a different kind of formula, is exponential. And as I click that, and this is typically a curved line, although not necessarily. And you'll see what's happening there. The r-squared factor there, not quite as good as the other one's 0.84. But here too, you have that ability to extend it forward, in this case 10 periods. So you do have to know a little bit about regression analysis and how to use that capability. If you're not too familiar with those terms, moving average, I think makes sense for a number of people. This doesn't give us a projection into the future. Let's close this, and for the moment, we'll leave it at moving average. And recognize too that sometimes you might want to use a column chart. So I'm going to switch the design here, change the chart type to be a column chart. And some people prefer this with trend lines because there's the obvious difference in the chart type. We have a line and columns together here, and maybe that makes it more readable. Another option here too is if you're familiar with a function called trend, you could show a linear line here manually. What I'm going to be doing here in column C is highlight this data here, and I've already previously made sure that this data will go into the chart. So I've highlighted this data. I'm going to type equal trend, left parenthesis, and select all of the sales data right here. And this is a special kind of function. It's an array function. I'm going to press not simply enter, but Control-Shift-Enter. Now it puts the data in as a column here. I want to change that to a line. Right there it is. And design, change chart type, make that be a line, possibly with the points. And we see what's happening there. There's the linear line being added to the chart. If we're going to keep that, we probably want to change its color. But we also have our moving average there, and we have this trend line for linear. And one other type that has its own function is exponential, and the term here is called growth. And similar to what I did with trend, I'm going to highlight this data here and type equal growth, left parenthesis, and select the sales data again. And this time press Control-Shift-Enter, and that data goes into a chart. And there too, we want to change that into, by using the Design tab, leftmost button, change chart type. We'll use a line chart here as well with markers. If we want to keep all 3 of those, and of course that's making it look pretty crowded, we'd want to change the color and so on, but different ways to add these trend lines. Again, the manual way of doing this makes sense for most people. What I did here with the functions is just to point out that there is another approach to that, so you can get the actual points out there as well. But it is an analytical tool, a trend line that gives us the possibility of analyzing the data that we see on a chart. For line charts and area charts, sometimes it's difficult to read points because the points on the line or the area are far removed from the actual axis. What point is this? We can probably figure that out. That looks like March, and of course the pop-up helps us too. but at a glance, maybe it's a little bit more difficult to read. Let's add what are called drop lines. So the chart is selected, Layout tab in the ribbon, Lines, Drop lines. A lot easier to read here. And similarly with an area chart, let's make a change here on the Design tab in the ribbon, leftmost button, Change Chart Type. And this time we'll switch it to one of the area chart options, say the first one right here. And now we have an area chart. Sometimes when you do this, you have to add the lines again. If you double click on the lines, you can certainly make some changes there regarding the colors if you want, but it's probably not necessary in the example here. And I think you're going to find this more useful when you have even more points in this. Not that it's not useful here, but the more points you have, the more useful this feature might be. It's called drop lines. You can use them only on line charts and area charts. In line charts, you might want to compare the difference between two different series by connecting the high and low points for each specific time period with lines or with bars. In both of these features, I think you have to actually see what we're talking about here rather than trying to explain this. They're available on the Layout tab in the ribbon. In this particular situation here, we're comparing domestic and Latin American values for a 6-month period. Selecting the chart and then going to the Layout tab, the lines are found on the Lines button in the Analysis group. High-low lines show high-low lines on a 2D, two-dimensional line chart. And it simply accentuates the fact that not only are there differences every month, but in certain months the differences are substantially larger, and the lines just allow us to see this a bit better than we might otherwise. Another approach to showing this difference has a little more variation on it, and it does give us the added capability of showing negatives versus positive differences. And that's called, under up-down bars, the choice, naturally up-down bars. And you'll notice that there's a difference in the colors here. The blacks are those situations where the domestic value is higher in Latin America. The whites are in the opposite direction. If for whatever reason you don't care for the colors, what you can do here is simply change the series order. And you can do that by going to the Design tab. And the fourth button from the left, it's in the data group, is called Select Data. Brings up this dialog box here. And over on the left-hand side, simply change the order of either one of these by clicking the arrow here. So as I click the arrow here, watch the 4 black boxes here turn white, the 2 white boxes turn black. We're simply changing the order of them. And so this feature too, like the high-low lines, accentuates the difference. But in this case, we actually see color differences between two different series on a two-dimensional line chart. In some charts, you might want to show additional values above or below, possibly both or either, certain points on a chart series. You might want to put in vertical bars based on percentages or standard error or fixed values, standard deviation, or your own calculations. These tend to work best when we're dealing with just a small amount of data, and you can use them on column charts, line charts, area charts, bar charts, scatter charts, and bubble charts, but not any of the other types. Let's just apply some of these to the lower chart here, which shows a single line for domestic sales projected. Selecting the chart and then going to the Layout tab in the ribbon, Error bars. See some choices here. Error bars with standard error displays the bars for the selected chart using standard error, and you have to know what that means statistically, and you see what's happened on the chart there. That might be one option to explore. Back to error bars. Error bars with percentage displays error bars for the selected chart series with 5% value. And notice how on the January point, because the value is lower, we can hardly see the 5% difference on either side. So I think that's when you might want to consider changing. Another option under error bars with standard deviation. So in this example, the standard deviation will be calculated. We don't see that on the screen, but we will see bars that fall between. So that's the standard deviation for the entire range of data that we're looking at there. And the January and June points are outside the standard deviation. The other 4 are within it. Now, for more detail on this and for more adjustment, let's go back to error bars, more error bar options. And so for the moment, since we just chose standard deviation, we're seeing that there. Let's move this over so we can see our data along with this. Maybe we want to explore that percentage option here. And earlier, we saw how 5% was the default. Maybe 10% is what we want here. Let's change that. click somewhere else, come back again, and see what's happening there. It's going to be different. Maybe 25% is what we want to try here. And you can see what's happening there. So maybe that's the choice that we'd like to make here. Notice also up above, you've got control over whether you want these error bars to appear both above and below the points, or just below or just above. And then some choices on the design of the endpoints here, the caps and no caps and so on. And some other choices out here as well too. So let's suppose we leave it at 25, and it might look like that. Now, what you might also want to do to accompany this, and you'd have to use the math behind what we're trying to do here. Right now, these error bars represent, in both high and low positions here, 25% above and then 25% below the given point. So over here in the worksheet itself, for example, in cell B10, here's a formula. It's simply 75%, in other words, it's 25% lower than the January value of 80. And formulas are put in all across here. And here are the ones that are above that. So 25% above the 80 naturally is 100. And these are multiplied by 1.25. Both of these could be set up in different ways, so you could simply put in a percent out here and work with that. And if you're familiar with functions and formulas, that'd probably be a little bit more efficient. But nevertheless, these items are here, and we could, if we wanted to, copy these into the chart. So simply highlighting this data and right-clicking, we can choose Copy, or Control-C, of course, and then on the chart, select the chart itself, click in Chart Area, right-click, and Paste. And now we see those very lines based on the data in rows 10 and 11 also portrayed here. So sometimes you might want to accompany those error bars with actual lines that appear here. Now, if you try this on other kinds of charts, and you're certainly encouraged to do that, I think you'll see how it's likely to introduce some clutter. But you can do these on column charts and line charts. Maybe we'll just put them on this series only, and here too. Layout tab, error bars, and we'll just use percentage here like we did before, percentage, and we see what's happening in there too. From that point, we might want to go to error bars, more error bar options. And although we don't always have to use 25, just use that to correspond with our previous example. See how that looks. So sometimes you can use them this way too. Notice how it adjusts the scaling in the process too. So I think it might work a little bit better on line charts. You can certainly use these on column charts as well too. To improve readability or simply to spice up a chart, you might want to select a specific color and shading effect for a column, a bar, a line, an axis line, a pie wedge, practically any element in a chart, including plot area and chart area itself. You can change the color background and a lot of associated features that come with that. In this column chart to the right of the data, click on it and select just the blue columns. I want to use a different color here. The Format tab in the ribbon is activated. Under Shape Styles, we have some choices, and not just the 7 choices we see here, but the drop arrow gives us many, many more. And as I'm sliding over these, keep an eye on those columns, you can see what is about to happen. And perhaps a lot more choices than we ever would have dreamed of. The so-called live preview capability of Excel at least lets us explore this a lot faster than in some of the older versions of Excel where you actually had to make the choice, then decide whether you liked it and come back in here and so on. So we can certainly explore this. Wouldn't say that's necessary here, but maybe I'll just use this color instead. Click, there we go. Lots of choices here. And if this is a line chart, we might want to go down that path. Design, change chart type, make it be a line chart. Similarly here, now notice what happens though when you switch types. Sometimes your previous choice doesn't necessarily work so well with a different chart type. So if I click this series only, and then go to the Format tab, and explore some of these choices here. And not so obvious what might be happening here, but you see as I slide over these different choices. So you might have to go back here in some cases and redesign the chart. Maybe it would be better here to get out of here simply by pressing Control-Z a few times. Go back to this color and then switch it to a line chart. Design, change chart type, line chart, come back here, select the line, then go into Format, and explore some of these options. Now, without suggesting that doing these things is always fun, or is it really necessary, you can see how you can get sidetracked so easily on these. And what we're doing here potentially is changing the look of this line to make it be a lot thinner. By the way, notice on this last set down here, this doesn't show any line at all. None of these across the bottom do. The ones above that do show the line, and the ones above that do. The ones up here, because there's a white border, shows a white line. If you were to choose one of these and say, yeah, but I want the line to be thicker, next approach then would be to double click on the line itself, and that takes us into another dialog box where we can talk about the line color, make a change there again, and then line style. So it's a bit bewildering as to how you might approach making all these changes. That's why sometimes we say don't get too sidetracked in all the visuals here. But let me point out just a few more here. Once again, I'll press Ctrl Z a few times, and perhaps leave it right there for the moment. You might have a pie chart like we see in the lower left corner. I'm going to click on the pie chart. Maybe I want to change the color of just one of the wedges. Maybe it's the green one I want to change, so I'll click on that one. After having clicked the pie itself, now the green wedge only is selected. We'll go into the Format tab in the ribbon up above, and now we have shape styles applied to this. And as we slide over these, and I think you would have expected that and no big surprises as you make some choices here possibly. Choose a different one than we saw before, go down that path. And if you click the outer area, that's the chart area. Sometimes just a quick fix here, go right into shape styles, light blue in the outer area, inner area. If you want a different color there, go there. How about this? And so on. And you can certainly make some bad color choices along the way too. Here's the legend itself, click on it. That could be a different color. And the lines themselves, how about the axis line on the left-hand side? I'm going to click the axis line and keep an eye on the shape styles up above as I do. And now the choices have to do with the thickness of the line. And I wouldn't say that's a great choice. I'm going to press Ctrl Z, but I think you get the idea here. All the different elements of a chart. One more here, the title itself. Maybe that will look better in its own little background. And you can see what could happen there as well. So for any number of reasons, you can apply different color and shading effects to various chart elements by way of the Format tab in the ribbon Shape Styles. To provide more variety and visual impact, you can use the many shape fill, shape outline, and shape effects, such as glow, 3D, soft edges, bevel, etc. These are options on the Format tab, and you can apply these to various selected chart elements. Let's imagine in this particular chart here to the right, we've got a title. Let's explore some of the options we might want to use on the title. That's not in a box, it has a different color. So what do we see here when we go to the Format tab? Some shape effects. And what you'll notice sometimes are some effects that appear to be selectable and yet you can't do anything with them. Now here's one for shadow. But do you recognize here as we drag over and keep an eye on that title there off to the right, you can see what's happening here with some of these shadows, not too well on some of them, but others better based on the placement. I see how the shadow will appear there even though we don't really see a box. And you have an inner shadow down here as well too. And on these, you don't see a preview, so that's a little bit confusing. Why aren't we seeing a preview here? So sometimes what you need to do is to actually, as a precursor here, as a forerunner to this, take that box itself, or select the title again is a better way to say it, and then go to Shape Styles, maybe provide a background color. I don't think this is at all intuitive, but once you get the idea here, once we have given this a color background, let's say, in other words, we've applied a shape style, now we can go to Shape Effects. And not only see these shadows here, but the inner shadows as well. You see what those are doing to that title, if you like that sort of thing. You also see glow. And as we slide over this, you probably never thought about really needing this, but there it is. And you can see that title glowing in different ways there. So we see it that way. Now, if I undo some of these features with Ctrl Z repeatedly, meaning undo, go back once again to where it's just a title. And again, a reminder here, if you did like that glow effect because you had seen it in the past, you might forget if you don't use it a lot, you'll come back and use shape effects and try and apply a glow here. And as I'm sliding over these, we're not seeing any glow. And once again, the reason is that we're not really seeing the box. In other words, we have to apply a color to the box, one of these choices here. How about a different one this time? Now maybe we can come back to Format, Shape Effects, and take a look at the glow now. And you see how that works. So we didn't see the glow unless we had an actual box that was filled in with color. Kind of hard to say all that in one sentence, but I think you get the idea there. Occasionally you might want to apply a box feature before proceeding with some of the shape effects. It is misleading because the shape effects appear to be selectable, yet they don't do anything. Here's a legend too, same general idea. Let's apply a shadow to that, maybe an inner shadow. Of course, we can't see that right now. Of course, many times you'll have to scroll around a little bit as you apply these. So we'll try that there. There's a glow effect. And here too, same situation. We didn't put that legend in a box. Let's quickly do that. with a choice up there. Then we can come back, try some of these glow effects, and you can see what's happening there. Lots of possibilities there. And we can do this to the chart area. That's the outer area of a chart. You might want to put up shadow on that too. And again, without exploring all these, because it would take forever, you get some ideas here. Make the entire chart have a shadow around it, something like this. And you can see in the background what's about to happen. It's like click here and get out here and move around a little bit. Scroll the screen leftward. We can see how the outer area of that chart has a shadow on it. And that's because we selected chart area before going to format and shape effects. And one choice in there you might have seen too that doesn't seem to be selectable at all is called reflection. Now you can get to this in other ways, and I'm not suggesting you really need this, but it is one of those effects that some people find appealing. And as far as I know, in charting, the only way this will work, and it doesn't work on legend, it doesn't work on titles or any of the major areas here, but if you do insert a text box, if we go to the Insert tab here and choose text box. Now it doesn't really have to be in a box for all the features, but how about for actual reflection itself? You do see the temporary box there, and maybe we want to say preliminary projections or something like that, just another bit of text here. Doesn't make any difference what it is for the moment, just for the sake of an example. If we click the border here and then go back into format, we now have some shape effects options here. And there's reflection. Again, I'm not making a strong case for saying you need this, and we're not quite seeing anything yet. We don't get the live preview here because it's not in a box, but click there, and then click outside. And again, you're not seeing it. In this case, let's put a box on it. Any of these colors here, doesn't make any difference which one's solid or different kind of bordered and so on. Possibly that one. Reshape this. And let's come back in here again under Format, Shape Effects, Reflection. Now you can begin to see what's happening there. Pretty cool effect if you like that idea, and I've used it occasionally. It always raises questions like, how'd you do that? And, after all, maybe don't get old, but just, again, one of the many different features we can use. But in this particular case, the reflection example only works within a text box, and then you get your own separate formatting. So the other tools that we used were on the Format tab under Shape Effects and Shape Styles. So quite a few different variations just to add a little bit of flair to that chart that maybe is lacking in oomph or presentation power. If you've worked with word art, a feature common not only to Excel but also to Word and PowerPoint, you might want to consider using it for some specialized title needs. Now there is a full-fledged version of word art available when you work with text data outside of a chart. Inside of a chart, it's a bit more limited. In this particular column chart right here, we might want to make the title be a little fancier perhaps. Just click the title itself. And then on the Format tab in the ribbon, possibly consider some of these word art styles here. And you can see enough of the title there to the left to imagine what could happen if we make these choices. You see the various letter types here. So we can begin to see some options there. So these, by the way, are quite blurry looking. It's not in the transmission of this. They're just blurry looking, that's all. And that is a certain look that you might even want from time to time. So I've chosen this one. And possibly then you might want to choose some text effects, some shadows here, this sort of thing. And usually on these, the so-called live preview of Excel is in effect. And as we slide over some of these choices, we see what's happening to that title just to the left of these choices. And there's a reflection, which we had seen in an earlier movie. And that's another possibility too. Again, a special effect for a title. And let's not forget glow. And again, the many options here to apply these to various text entries. And you can certainly apply these not only to title areas, but also to some of the other text items that we have on a chart. So maybe we'll just go with this one. Notice that some of these choices, ones that we would normally see under word art when it's applied to worksheet data, are not available here. Bevel and 3D rotation and transform and so on. So again, items to explore here. If you're looking for that special effect, I wouldn't say that's such a great option here. In fact, I'm going to go back and change it. Again, just to recommend the idea that there are certainly some things you might want to explore here. But on the other hand, this feature probably works best from my perspective as a regular worksheet feature as opposed to something you want to try on charts. Chart areas, plot areas, columns, bars, and many other chart elements have borders, and you sometimes want to change them. You can adjust the color, the thickness, and the type or style of border. Let's start with the title here in this chart on the left side of the screen here. by way of the Format tab in the ribbon, rather than filling in the shape, how about a shape outline here of one of these colors, possibly one of these here, pick one. If you want to change the style, you might also notice here under shape outline, the weight here, or dashes. Now you can get to another way too, and some people prefer this approach. If we simply double click the border of the title here, the Format Chart Title dialog box appears, and here's the border color again. We could have started here as well too, by the way. And possibly we're going to change the color or the gradient line, a line that varies in its color. I doubt if most people would want that. Let's go back here and choose border styles. How about the dash type? Large dashes like this. And how about the width of this, possibly at the same time? We could make some changes here. Now, unfortunately, when you make some of these changes, you're not seeing them very clearly in the preview until you actually close. Come back here, and now we can see what's happened here. And looks like the gradient got applied there. Wasn't paying attention as closely as I might have been maybe, but let's double click back here again on the border to resurrect the dialog box. Use a solid line. There we go. And maybe a different color while we're at it. And you can see how sometimes part of the confusion in using some of these features in Excel is you're not quite sure of where did I start the last time and how did I get there. And the point is you can get to some of these features through different techniques. As a general rule in Excel 2010, when you work with charts, if you double click a chart element, you're likely to get the appropriate dialog box. But you can also, of course, as the features we're seeing here, get to these features by way of the Format tab in the ribbon, so different places to get to the same location. So once again, once we're in here, border styles, we could again experiment with some of the different dash types if somehow we thought that was appropriate, and the width, and some other choices here as well. Click outside, and we can do this, and I wouldn't say we need to do this at all on the outer chart border, the chart area. Once again, we'll do it the faster way, double click, and we've got a border color here. Make it a solid line, pick the color we might want, about dark blue there, and then border styles, make it substantially thicker maybe, and you can see that one happening in the actual chart to the left. And once again, not that we need to make a difference, but we can explore some of these as well too. So that's easily handled. We could do the same thing on the plot area, the inner area. I don't think you'd want to apply these to the columns themselves, but we could go down that path as well, double click. And you want to be careful not to double click on just one of them, but all of them, so they're all selected. And here too, border color, probably not a great choice here, but we can go down this path as well. You see what might be happening here. Probably can't see that too clearly on the column, but I might choose orange here, and then go to the styles and make that thicker as well too. And you can begin to see what's happening to those columns. That's not particularly attractive from my perspective, so I wouldn't want to keep that, but nevertheless, the fact that you can do that, or sometimes you see the effect and you want to copy it, invariably we start by double clicking and then pursue some of those options available in the dialog boxes. So you do have control over the color and the thickness and the style of borders on the various chart elements in Excel charts. Applying color shading effects to various areas of charts, particularly the larger elements like chart area, plot area, and some larger titles, is something that I would recommend doing by using the Format button and some of the choices you might already have seen, but you do have some fine-tuning capability here, and part of the reason you might want to know this is that if you are dealing with charts created in Excel 2003 and prior versions, you might be trying to duplicate a particular color capability there. Some of the things we're about to see will allow you to, in effect, create some color choices the way you might have done it in prior versions of Excel. But I would think, say in this chart here, if you want to change the chart area right here, just click on the Format tab, go to Shape Styles, as you might have learned in another movie. Pick the style you want, and quite a few choices there, and if you don't like them, change the theme, but you can get there pretty fast. Didn't take you much time. If you have other needs, like I suggested here, and particularly if you're trying to come up with some of those color combinations that you might have seen in the past, you can attack these by way of changing the gradient colors. And the fastest way to get there is simply to double click the particular element that you're interested in. Say the outer chart area here, we'll just double click. And there's that dialog box with all kinds of choices here under fill. Solid fill. That's pretty obvious what that's doing, and we see the preview off to the left. But here we go with gradient fill. And sometimes you don't see anything at first here, but we do have some preset colors, and you may recognize some of these from older versions of Excel. They will use one of the rainbow options here. And if you have used that in prior versions, you also recall that you could have tilted the colors, slanted them in different ways. Well, those choices are available here under type. Instead of linear, how about radial? And we see some choices there, and then direction. And you can imagine all the possibilities you might explore this way. How about path is another one? And rectangular. See some choices there. And different effects that way too. And you can use picture and texture fills as well. Back to solid fill possibly, or no fill, or better yet, close. And I didn't necessarily mean you'd want to use this one, but here's an example of the chart area having no fill in it. Think of it as if it's on a pane of glass. We can see through it. We can see the data in the background. Don't think most people would want that. I'm going to press Control Z a few times here to undo the previous settings and go through this cycle relatively quickly with a series of Control Zs to go back to here possibly. So it's not that you necessarily need these capabilities. Again, I think it's best to go to the Format tab and make your color choices this way. But on any of these chart elements, including columns, for example, I'm going to double click on the blue columns here. Double click, selecting all of them. And here too, in the Format Data Series dialog box, we can go to Fill. And once again, we see gradient fills. And because we used rainbow last, that's what we're seeing here. I think you can understand and see what could happen here if you're not too careful. You got time on your hands, you'll be spending way too much time here. And we can also get to colors this way too for solid colors, if you haven't explored that option as well. So I think for many people, it's the alternative to the standard approach for adding colors to chart elements in Excel 2010, but do recognize you have that capability by way of double clicking and using the various fill options that are present in this dialog box. If you want to control the appearance of axes, lines, or grid lines, you can do so by going to Special Features Not Found on the Format tab. I would recommend, however, if you're working with a chart like the one we're seeing on the left side of the screen here, a column chart, if you want these grid lines to look different, you might first select them. And if you are having trouble, particularly on charts where there are many lines, if you're having trouble selecting a line, I would recommend going to the Layout tab and then the leftmost button. If you have not yet been able to click on the line, click the drop arrow here, and all selectable elements of a chart are available here, so possibly you'll click the line this way. And from there, you could just click Format Selection. The slightly faster way to have done all that would have been to have double-clicked the line itself. But it does take us into this dialog box here, and possibly under Line Color, you might want to make a change here to Solid Line, change the color if you wish, that sort of thing. Line Style gives you the option of changing the dash type, this sort of thing, and the thickness, and some other choices as well. So as I'm making this thicker and wider and so on, you begin to see what's happening. There is a tendency with some users to make grid lines more dominant than they really need to be. And this example right now, if I were to close this, that's not a great look. It tends to draw attention away from the actual data. So I'd suggest keep the width somewhat narrower and don't necessarily emphasize it with dashing, but although here and there that can make some sense too, but some personal choice there, maybe that draws a little more attention to the lines. So experiment with these ideas at least. Now, keep in mind too that if you want to change the chart, a standard way to do this without getting into some of these fine-tuning features is to actually click on a line, for example here, and then on the Format tab, under Shape Styles, you've got these options. And I wouldn't recommend most of these because they're fairly dark and thick. And again, I think you're in a situation where maybe you're overwhelming the data. But when you need those fine-tuning tools, you can just double-click or take that other approach I suggested by going to the Layout tab. And you might want to do this with axes as well occasionally. So if I click on the axis here, here too. There we go, click on the axis. Immediately, if the Format tab is active, you'll see the difference in the shape styles. And we can go through that process again too. Or again, simply double-clicking the axis over there takes us into the dialog box, Format Axis. And we can go to Fill and Line Color and again explore some of the choices here. For some people, they might need these options because they're working with charts that were created in Excel 2003 and in prior versions. And some of these fine-tuning capabilities, I would suggest you try and ignore and not try and match up. But if you need them, here's how to get to them by way of double-clicking and then going into the Format dialog box to make some of these choices like you've just seen. You can control the font style and the size of all chart text at once, or simply portions of a chart as you wish. And the features we're about to show you here are not available on the Format tab of the ribbon. They're actually available on the Home tab or by way of right-clicking. Now, if you click in the chart area of a chart, I'm about to do that here. Remember, the chart area is the outer area, sometimes called the perimeter area of a chart, not the inner area, which is called plot area. If you click on the chart area and then go to the Home tab, if you make a change to the font size, for example here, 10, I'm going to slide over these. You'll notice as I'm sliding over these that all of the text on the chart is changing at the same time. And I doubt if you wouldn't ever make it this big, of course, but sometimes this is an approach, particularly if you're getting a chart from another source and you just want to readjust all the titles. You might start by clicking in the chart area. Make them all be the same size, say a reasonable size, and then where you want to make it different, if you want to make a different font size somewhere, click there. So I want the title to be different. I'll click here and make that be 16 or 18 or whatever, so I'm changing only the text there. And similarly, if I want to make a change to the legend over here, I'll come over here, slide the mouse around. Usually there's a box, but not always. Just click so that the box is active. And now we could go to, on the Home tab, the drop arrow for the size, make a change there if that's what we wanted. And we can do that with the different portions of a chart that contain text. Another approach to this is simply to right-click. Slight advantage here could be, suppose as I right-click here on the border that is, the mini toolbar appears a tad closer perhaps. You can make some changes here. Maybe I'll shrink this a bit too. And also, whether adjusting all of the chart text entries at once or just a portion, you certainly do have the option also of changing the font style itself. So I might want to use Arial Black. Maybe I used that recently, or certainly all of these other many choices. And even though we can't see the text along the left side of the chart, it too is potentially about to be changed to some of these other choices here. And you can see what's going on here too. So sometimes you want to make wholesale changes to all elements of the chart that contain text, sometimes just this one or that one separately. So once again, beginning with chart area possibly, then using some of the other tools available on the Home tab. And remember, the alternate way to get there too is simply to right-click on the appropriate location on its actual border and possibly use at this point the mini toolbar as well. Different ways to adjust fonts, not by way of the Format tab, but by way of choices on the Home tab. You might want to rotate text either to accommodate more explanatory text or possibly to improve readability. Here too, a feature that is not going to be reached by going to the Format tab and choosing any of the options there. Best way to get to slanting text capability is simply to go to the Home tab in the ribbon. In other words, we're using features that are available outside the realm of charting. It's strongly advisable not to tilt your main title, but if you want to go there, that's available and it is acceptable. The angled text option here under alignment, you can certainly do that if you wanted to, maybe here and there for special effects with shorter words. It might make some sense. Now, if you click on the legend, you'll see immediately that that box is unselectable, and probably with a good reason. Who would want a slanted legend? If you try this on the left-hand side here on this text, you could go down that way too. And what about at the bottom here? This is a more likely use of this underneath the columns here. Now, we probably don't really need to do that here, but we could use this button again. If that's the need, recognize here too that some of this might happen automatically. This chart is reflective of the data over in columns A through D. If I put in the word January right here instead of JAN, and I'll just edit and type that onto the end of it. As soon as I press enter, watch the chart here. January appears there. But what if I take the January entry, and a lot of you know this autofill technique here. I'm going to convert all the rest of the months to full spellings just by double-clicking. Keep your eye on the chart as I double-click that lower left-hand corner. You see what's happening now. Now, sometimes you'll do that, and it actually will slant the text for you. And sometimes it doesn't, and I'm hard-pressed to sometimes describe why that happens because I'm not really sure. But what we would want to do here is change this, in addition to using that button, which probably is the fastest way. Another way that we frequently make changes in Excel 2010 to different elements in the chart is simply to double-click. So if we double-click one of the labels down below here, any of these months, double-click, we immediately see a dialog box whose last choice includes alignment. But you'll notice on these, the text direction is limited. Horizontal, 90 degrees, well, that could be okay. Perhaps the other way might be better. But where's that angle? Well, how about stacked? Is that going to work? That's a terrible choice. And we're not getting the choice here that says custom angle unless we choose horizontal and then 45. Now, I'm certainly not claiming this is faster or better than what we just saw. And you see what's happened here? That may not be the direction you want, so how about a minus 45 there? How's that going to look? There we go. So that's a little bit harder to get to than you might think. And so another way to do this, as I suggested, but since we've already done it, we don't need to. Select the labels region, then go to the Home tab, possibly make your choices this way. So different ways to get there, but there will be times, and you're much more likely to apply this feature to the axis across the bottom of a chart than anywhere else. For most Excel users, column and bar charts are the most popular chart types. They have a lot of features in common, but a couple that you might not be aware of are called gap width and overlap. I'll be starting with some examples with column charts and then show you some similar examples with bar charts, and also give you a stronger rationale as to why sometimes a bar chart might be better for your uses. As we look at the three charts here closest to the data, a reminder here what these chart types are actually called. The one below the data is probably the most common type. It's a clustered column chart. It's the default chart type unless you've made a change to that setting in Excel. The chart to the right of the data here, the one with the lavender background, is called a stacked column chart. Remember, its big advantage is we can tell at a glance what the total happens to be. We can see that April is bigger than February, if only slightly. A bit difficult to discern if we're looking at the clustered column chart below the data. Less commonly used but occasionally used, and possibly as an antidote to shortcomings of a pie chart, is the chart here below the stacked column. This is called a 100% stacked column. And here, the various sizes don't represent proportional size, but in each case, the column adds up to 100%. The January column here represents a total of 290, these four segments, whereas the June total represents a total of 490, and we can see those numbers over in the data in row 10. So if we're looking at the two green areas here, for example, in January and February, the January green looks substantially larger. It's 110, and here we see 120. It's actually larger, but it looks smaller. But of course, proportionally, Asia has a bigger share of the total in January. So what we're showing here month by month is a percentage breakout. But as you might be noticing though, where's the actual percent? We don't see it here. So if you are using charts like this, you might want to consider showing this in the actual data which is nearby. But it does give us a quick read on what's happening proportionally. For whatever reason, Asia, which had a large share in January, that share began to shrink as we look at other months, and as we move out to June, substantially smaller, at least percentage-wise. Something else you might notice in this chart too, there's a lot of white space between the columns. We see that up above in the stacked column chart, not so much over in the clustered column chart. But no matter what the chart type is, if you double-click on one of the columns, so I'll do it here on the stacked column chart, double-click. In the dialog box, Format Data Series, you will see a choice called Gap Width. Possibly it's set here. Move this aside just slightly. Keep an eye on that chart to the left. I'm going to slide this leftward. You see what's happening? The gap between the clusters for each month is very narrow and now it's disappeared completely. For some chart types, maybe that makes sense. Drag it anywhere you want, increase the gap width here and there if you think that looks better. So you've got some choices there. And we can try this on other charts too. Here's the stacked column chart to the right of the data. Click one of those there. How about the gap width here? And you see what's happening. The white space between them. Same thing would happen down below on the other chart here. And you see what's going on there? Now you also see a choice called Series Overlap. I'm going to try that on the chart below the data, that clustered column chart again. Click one of the columns. And we see what's happening here. And as I slide rightward, they overlap a little bit. I don't think this is necessarily a desirable feature, maybe here and there, to reduce a little bit of clutter. If you carry this too far, you essentially are taking the column in front and giving it more attention than it's due. But at least it's there from time to time. You might want to try this on the stacked chart. You're going to be surprised at what happens here unless you've seen this feature before. Be sure to click on one of the series and then slide this back and forth a little bit. You see what's happening here. And you might have to do some explaining as to how to read that, but I think possibly here and there, that has some merit. And similarly in the chart down below here too, if we change that, you see what's happening there too. I think you're perhaps less likely to use the feature here, but at least it's available. Now, in all cases here, if we switch any or all these charts to a bar chart, I'll just click on the one below the data and then go to the Design tab in the ribbon up above, and that leftmost button, Change Chart Type. We could certainly turn these into bar charts. Pretty much the same approach here, same data, everything's rotated 90 degrees. Sometimes you have to do some label adjustments, but the white space idea is going to work in the same way, and here too, the overlap idea. So let's say we'd be repeating ourselves here, but on a 3D chart, there is a difference, and with a column 3D chart, at least this kind of 3D chart, there's another issue that we need to deal with. If you look closely at the columns here, and also look at the order of the legend, the order of the legend will match the order of the data unless you make a change. And sometimes you might need to make a change, as we might need here. As you look at the data, the red columns are behind the green ones. Red represents Europe, green represents Asia. It'd be a lot easier to see those if we could somehow move that series forward. So the way we get here is to just click here, and you can do it two ways. From the ribbon on the Design tab, fourth button from the left, select Data. And in this dialog box, even though we don't really see the words, we do see arrows here. So I'm going to click Europe. And first time around, you'll probably use the wrong arrow. I do half the time. I'm going to click the drop arrow here. And watch the Europe set of columns, the red ones in this 3D column chart, move forward to appear to be in front of the green. Also watch the legend order change, but the original data in rows 6 and 7 is not going to change at all. So I'll click the drop arrow right here in this dialog box. So you see what's happened to the chart. The legend has adjusted. The actual data has not changed. Sometimes you need to do this. You can do this with other charts as well. I certainly wouldn't say it's necessary in the chart below the data that's a bar chart. We'd have to close this first, click OK. But in this chart here, somehow or other you wanted the order of the series to be different. We can just click on any one of them and then go to Select Data. Again, it's on the Design tab. And here, just by playing with the arrows a little bit, see what's happening? See how we're moving the blue bar upwards? And maybe Asia typically is second place, so I'll move it up also. Actually moving it down the list here, but up on the chart. I'm going to take Europe and do one more of those, so maybe that's a slightly better look. But some people would suggest don't do this at all, because by changing the order here, you're not always matching up with the order that appears on the worksheet, and sometimes you do care about that. Now, many times it's a toss-up between row and column. It's either personal preference, or sometimes it's just because other charts you created in previous years maybe were columns, so you'll continue to use those. But here's a situation where you might think either chart choice is going to work the same, but maybe a bar chart might be better here. Here's a different set of data with some department names and some salaries. To create a chart with this data, because the data is contiguous and is surrounded by empty cells, we can simply click on a single cell here. If we're in a hurry, press Alt F1, we'll get the default chart type, and it's a column chart. I think you can see here we have difficulty reading the labels. They're slanted, and we're not seeing them all, unless we make it a lot wider. And I wouldn't say it's a horrible chart, but we do have this problem of reading the labels perhaps. Let's convert this into, by way of the Design tab in the ribbon, and the leftmost button, Change Chart Type, change it into a bar chart. A clustered bar chart. And we see what's happening. No, we will have to make this taller. Probably don't want it to overlap the data. We're seeing every other title here. And we'll make it taller from the bottom. And sometimes you have to do that by way of a font change as well. So now we can read the titles more easily than we might have in a column chart. The other thing you might want to do here, particularly if it's important, if you notice the order here, it's the upside down order of what we're seeing out in column AD. So a quick approach here would be to double click this axis. And in the choices that we have here, categories in reverse order. And you see what's happening immediately in the background there too. And so that's an improvement. So I think sometimes, at least when you have long labels, bar chart might be a better choice. I have a tendency to favor column charts. I think a lot of people do, but sometimes I use bar chart just for variation. They both work pretty much the same way, and all the things we've talked about in terms of gap width and overlap are going to be very similar in the two chart types for columns and bars. Line charts are generally considered the best charts to use when you're trying to show a trend, and nearly always they're associated with dates and times, sometimes hours and minutes even. As we look at this chart here, I think one choice we might want to make is the size of the actual points. Remember, a quick double click usually is the way in Excel 2010 to make adjustments like that, formatting changes. If you double click the actual line, you get quite a few choices available under Format Data Series and under Marker Options. I think a recommended choice might be here, click Built-in, and possibly reduce the size of those markers. And that happens immediately as you watch the lines here to the left. Sometimes you might want to change the actual line style too. Change the width of that. Sometimes that works a little bit better too with a narrower line. You'll notice in the chart to the right here, that one of the lines looks a little different, and it's actually smooth, whereas the other lines, like the line in the previous chart, are jagged. The option that we're talking about though is called smooth. We'll use it on the chart to the left. For example, double click the line, and then under line style, you see an option called smoothed line. Click here, and you see what's happened to the line. And if we click outside of it, you see it even better. So sometimes that's appropriate. Gives a slightly different look, a different feel. Perhaps it accentuates the trend. And so on the chart on the right, similarly, if we double click one of the lines, and we can do the same sort of thing there under line style, smooth the line, get the idea. And it looks like this, and we could do this with the other ones as well. Don't have to do them all, of course, but probably if you are doing one, do them all. Line style, smooth line, and on the green one too. Line style, smooth line. And for certain charts, that provides a better look. Now, I mentioned earlier that line charts are best for showing trends over time. If you change the orientation of a chart, and I do recommend that you try that on various charts, particularly with column and bar charts. When you try this with the line charts, nearly always there's an obvious first choice between the two. So on this particular chart here, I'm going to go to the Design tab, and then the third button from the left, the Switch Row column that changes orientation. Look what happens. I think almost anybody would agree, it just doesn't read well. Now you could say, well, the data's there accurately, but a line chart, when not associated with time, in other words, as we move from left to right here, we're actually moving to different regions. And so the idea of somehow connecting them as if the data were flowing from one to another really doesn't make a lot of sense. And so when you do see the line charts without an axis reference to a date or a time frame, switch it by changing the orientation on the Design tab, third button from the left, Switch Row column. Now, there's some other things about line charts you want to be aware of too. And I think almost as soon as you see these images to the right, you'll recognize what's going on. Let me point out that these three charts here are all based on the same data. The data that's available right here. And it's pretty obvious if you were using one chart or another, and particularly maybe the tall one on the left or the wide one on the bottom. Even though we're talking about the same data, the visual tells a different story. I think in both cases we could say they're both exaggerated. Well, that's true. But if we were to alter them a little bit, changing the height to width, that's called the aspect ratio. It'd be like that. That doesn't look as eccentric as it did. And that shows a distinct rise in the data. And maybe you're trying to emphasize that. The lower chart says, okay, there's been change, but not a whole lot. That too, maybe a bit exaggerated here, will make it more like this. There's more of a slope there. And this chart too, perhaps is misleading. Now, usually you're not going to see the two next to each other, but remember during a presentation, when you do see line charts that are unusually wide or unusually tall, you might try and visualize the data a little bit differently. Again, we're seeing a different story, at least visually, from the data here, just based on the shape of the chart itself. And in the case here of the chart that is attempting to accentuate the change, let me make this a little narrower. Again, something else you could do here if you're going down that path, by double-clicking the left axis here. You can change the minimum axis option, make the starting point be 80. And possibly at the high end too, do something similar, make the high end go to 180. You saw immediately what the 80 did. And the 180 will even add more. In other words, make this be even steeper. And that's considered more acceptable on a line chart than it is on a column chart. So again, this really accentuates, despite the fact that we had some dips in there, huge change in our sales are really moving along well here, selling a lot more than we used to. And this chart to the right, it's improved as we move for the year, but not that much. Now, maybe you'd be using this style with different data where you're trying to hide a trend that shows increased absenteeism or something like that, but just be aware of this idea that resizing a line chart has impact on the display. And in our previous examples, we saw situations where we wanted to make changes to the line chart by smoothing the line, or in some cases, changing the orientation of a chart. These are the kinds of things you're looking for when you're using line charts in Excel. Pie charts are widely used, and although appropriate for some data, certainly not appropriate for all. And there are some oddities about charting, not only about the selection of data, but also about how you want to manipulate these pies, and whether they're 2D pies like the one we see to the right of the data here, or the three-dimensional pie below the data. There certainly are some similar adjustments we'd like to make. You'll notice here that I just clicked on the 3D pie, that the data that's selected shows 4 regions and yet only one turns up. If you haven't worked with pie charts, that's a bit of a surprise. A pie chart only deals with one row or column. And so in either case, and I'll click on the 2D pie as well over here, you'll see the same idea. So if you'd like to show Europe and Asia and Latin America, you will either need to create additional pie charts or perhaps use a stacked column chart or possibly a donut chart. Once you have a pie chart, you also probably at different times might consider rotating the pie chart. Make certain wedges appear more toward the front or to one side. You might want to tilt a 3D pie chart, and in both cases you might want to extract one wedge or another to draw attention to it. And anybody who's worked with pie charts has done this at least the first time around. I want to pull out a wedge here. So on the 2D pie chart, I'll just point here, click and drag, and all the wedges come out, and that's probably not what you want, although here and there maybe that's okay. But the idea here is, after we pull these back, and sometimes that's a little tedious, might be better here to press Control Z, couple of undos here. There we go. To pull out one wedge, simply click the pie, pause just for half second or so, click again, and then pull out a single wedge. Same thing with a 3D pie, click the pie, pause for a second or so, click one wedge, that wedge is selected, pull out that. Or you can certainly do this with more than one pie as well too. So that's easy and fast, no special commands required in either case. With a 3D pie chart, you might want to tilt the chart. Thinking that you would double click on the pie chart, that makes good sense. Throughout Excel 2010, you can often get to features simply by double clicking rather than trying to track down a command in the menu system. When you double click here, you'll see something else here. Rotation, no rotation. Right now it says 0. We can drag this, and you saw what happened on the pie there. And I would suggest most people don't need this most of the time. It does rotate the pie in such a way that January is now off to the right. The initial starting point here as I move this back is the January starts at the 12 o'clock position. So unless this is absolutely critical, I'd say don't bother with this. Now, if you're trying to tilt the pie, you would have thought that, well, by double clicking, that's going to get you there. And how about this 3D format here? And yet the adjustments here are fine-tuning adjustments that have nothing to do with this. So here's a little oddity. If you want to adjust the perspective on the pie or you want to tilt it more so that you're looking straight on at it, you double click, but not the pie itself. You double click either in the plot area or the chart area. I would never call it intuitive, so I'm going to double click the plot area here. And then this dialog box comes up. And 3D format, as what we just saw, wasn't that helpful. How about 3D rotation? Right away you're thinking, well, wait a minute, we had rotation before in a different dialog box, so it could be a little bit confusing. Why would we go here? As I click the arrow next to the X here, watch the pie chart. Now that's something we saw in a previous dialog box, so possibly you could come here to do this. But how about the Y here? For want of a better word, perhaps we'd see the word tilt nearby. Here and there, this makes some sense. It makes the pie chart perhaps more readable and doesn't distort it as much. And there's some perspective buttons down here as well too. I think for a lot of people, these are just fun and games. I wouldn't recommend these perspective buttons either. Notice as I'm doing this, for example, the green there representing March and the gold in the background there representing June. What's the value of the green? You see it right there on the pop-up, 125. The value of the gold, 180. So I'd say don't use the perspective unless you're just interested in distorting the view of things here. You won't get that similar feature, of course, on a 2D pie chart. Another thing you might want to do with a 3D pie, the height as percent of base, the arrow down here, I'm going to click the down arrow, and this is making the pie flatter and flatter and flatter. Now, if the nature of the data here happens to be something related to the volume of a certain kind of item you're selling, maybe here and there adjustment of this height has some relevance there. Although I kind of doubt that, but still, just a different look, and sometimes you want control over this. Recognize a couple of other deficiencies here with pie charts as well too. Now, I'm going to change January here to be -80. Suppose what we're tabulating here are profits. And for whatever reason, things went bad in January. I want to press enter. As you watch both pie charts, you would expect them to change. But they didn't change at all. Now, if we had labels on them, we'd see something different. But recognize that we are dealing with negative and positive data, and the very concept of a pie chart is the pieces add up to the whole. So this is extremely misleading, and I would say anytime you've got a negative, don't use it in a pie chart. Now, if someone suggested to me once if all of the numbers were negative, perhaps we could get away with this. Well, maybe so. I'm not sure what that data would be, but possibly that's an out here. I like to use the line too sometimes. There's no such thing as a negative piece of pie, so stay away from negative data. Now, the one major thing missing here, and it is covered in another movie, and that's how to apply data labels. Probably the best way here is just to click on this chart or that chart, and then go into the ribbon, choose layout, and then data labels, pick a location here, maybe outside in, something like that. There we do see the -80. And on the other chart too, similarly the 2D chart, data labels, maybe we'll put them in a different location. How about inside in? Sometimes you want to put them inside. So that's the only recognition that there is negative data, and I'd say don't use that kind of data. So there are lots of different things we want to do with pie charts, and certainly in some situations, they're totally appropriate for the data at hand, but I think you recognize some real limitations as well. Although less commonly needed by most Excel chart users, area, stock, and XY charts, sometimes called scatter charts, are specialized chart types ideal for some sets of data. Looking at this data here that covers information for about a 1.5 to 2-year period here, let's create a line chart off of this first, simply by clicking the Insert tab in the ribbon, choosing Line, this choice right here, click it. Not bad, it could be refined a bit, we could make the symbol smaller and so on, but an area chart presents this information in similar fashion, yet it shows the information as volume. So I'm going to change the chart type here to be an area chart. And there are 6 variations on area charts, very similar to the kinds of variations you see with line and column charts. Simple area chart, stacked, 100% stacked, and then 3 of these in 3D versions too. Here's the simple area chart. Double click it, and the red, which is representing other sales, is in front of the US sales. So we're seeing the information this way. This might be a little clearer if we change the style here to be this one, sort of pseudo 3-dimensional. And to convey the total amount here, we might want to use a stacked area chart. So let's go on the Design tab, leftmost button, Change Chart Type. We'll make this be a stacked area chart. Looking like that. And now the height of these, for example, this point here, represents the total of the other sales and the US sales. So one of our lower values down there somewhere, probably one of these two here, somewhere in there, we're talking about a total into the 30 million category in terms of totals. And another way to display this data too in an area chart, and this would definitely be better than showing it in a line chart, the design change to the chart type stacked, the 100%. Now these do require a little bit of interpretation and explanation perhaps, but for any given monthly period here, we can see for every one of them US sales comprise more than half. We're not seeing the actual percentage here, but we do see the percentage markers on the left-hand side. So overall, it looks as if US sales are averaging out about 60-65%, although it varies from month to month. So in any given month, for example, this one here, US sales has a higher proportion, looks like it does here than it does in other months. The totals add up to 100%. So area charts are just variations on line charts, sometimes more colorful, and they do tend to suggest volume by their appearance. Stock data, a specialized kind of chart, and there are 6 variations on this. Notice the data here, and I've segregated it a little bit. We've got data by date. We got high, low, close values for a given stock, also volume and open. Now, you might want to consider moving these around, but you won't really do that until you see some of the possibilities. And I've got data here that covers quite a large time frame. In fact, it could be covering years and years, but I think these charts are likely to work best for just a short time frame. Let's go to the Insert tab here and choose Other Charts. Now there are 4 variations on stock. As I slide over the first one, note that it says high, low, close. And if we want this to work, we must have them in that order. As you see them over on the left-hand side, columns B, C, and D. The second kind of stock chart is open, high, low, close. Requires 4 series of values in order, open, high, low, and close. If I were interested in this kind of chart, I'd have to move the column G data over and put it between A and B. Next type here, volume, high, low, close. I think you get the idea. These are the kinds of things you might want to be measuring for a given stock. And if you've been able to download that data from some source, one or more of these is likely to be of value to you. And this last one here is volume, open, high, low, close, all of these. I simply want to use the first one, and so I do have the data lined up already. It's high, low, and close. So simply by selecting this data, and I have put a Gapian down below so that we're only about to cover 1 month. In other words, this data right here. And a lot of you know if you simply click in a cell and create a chart, Excel picks up the surrounding data. It won't go beyond the empty column E there or the empty row 23. So we'll just click in here and go to Other Charts, make this first choice right here, and there's our chart. And probably not the most exciting chart in the world, not the easiest to read. We might want to make some changes here. You'll notice a couple things we might want to adjust almost immediately. If you look at it for a bit, you'll say, well, there's some gaps in here, aren't there? There's a gap there. You know, the stock market tends to be open, just 5 days a week and fewer on holidays, so we've got some gaps here. This is a minor point, but the way we could change this isn't so obvious. If you double-click the lower axis here, that activates a dialog box, and I don't think you'd automatically gravitate toward this choice, text axis. Let me move this over a little bit as I click text axis and watch the lower axis and watch the chart change. The weekend gaps are eliminated, so you'd probably want to try that. Perhaps more important is the way these lines look. Now, if you look at the legend high-low, you can sort of figure it out. What does that mean? The height of the bar. Maybe the more important item here to check is the close. But how can you actually get in there and click on it? It's going to be a little tricky. Maybe you might click there, you might click there, and so on. So if you would like to select the close item, then go to the Layout tab. In the current selection on the left-hand side, we're not trying to select the plot area. Let's click the drop arrow. We're trying to click the Close Series. And once that has been selected, then the choice right below it, Format Selection. So it takes a little bit of time to get here. Then in the Format Data Series dialog box, let's choose Marker Options and increase the size of this. I'm just clicking the up arrow here, and in a bit you'll see how that green marker out there is getting bigger. Maybe a black marker would be better. You can make your choice there if you wish and see what's happening. So I think that's something you probably want to do as well. Now, for some people, they say, well, all I care about is the closing price. Well, maybe a stock chart isn't the one you want anyway. Maybe it's just a line chart. So you can certainly work with this data with other charts. But if you do have high, low, close, volume, open data, or most of those, you have some possibilities here in using what's called a stock chart. Another kind of chart is called an XY chart. That's its official name, but it's frequently referred to as a scatter chart. In this data here, we have results of a race. Now, they happen to be sorted by age, but that doesn't have to be the case. I could click in column B here and go to data and sort them by times. Doesn't make any difference. They don't even have to be sorted. We're trying to see if there's any relationship between the age of the runners and the time that it took to finish this 10K race. And we got about 100 entries here or so. 99 looks like. So we'll click somewhere in the data. And then in the ribbon, choose Insert, Scatter, the first choice here. And first thought is, well, that's not so good, is it? What are we saying here? And we can get rid of the time legend on the right-hand side, just press delete. I think the first thing you might want to do here is say, well, we don't have anybody under 20 in this race. Why don't we adjust the scaling on the bottom? Simply double-click the scale on the bottom. And let's change the minimum here from automatic to be 20. And if you simply click on the word fixed, you'll see that it has adjusted. Let me move this over a little bit temporarily. There you can see what's happened. And at the high end, looks like that's raised. And I think the oldest runner, and this is 62, 63, that's looking okay. But the other axis we might want to change as well. And that gets a little trickier. Looks like the fastest time here is about 45 minutes, maybe a little bit under, but by double clicking the left axis. And you might have to guess at this a little bit. Let's change the minimum here. In other words, don't do the automatic scaling, turn it into 45, and you can type 0:45, that should do it. And I'll just click the word fixed here, and that makes a reasonable adjustment there. Now it's a lot trickier, and you have to work with it to get the intervals, or in other words, make the grid lines be a little bit different, but let's say we've done enough here at least to get the idea across that when you're trying to associate two different sets of numerical values, a scatter chart makes some sense. You might try this also with situations where you've got perhaps the age of people and their salaries. You're trying to see if there's a correlation there as well too. With a variety of different data types, you can use a scatter chart. So we've seen quick examples here of an area chart, a stock data chart, and a scatter chart, a little bit unusual for some people, but they do have their uses. To overcome some of the limitations of a pie chart, you might try using and experimenting with a donut chart. And if a scatter chart isn't giving you everything you might need, a bubble chart is worth exploring. A third kind of chart, a radar chart, you're unlikely to use, but just for the sake of experimentation, that too is worth a quick look. This particular data here, if we wanted to show the breakout by month for domestic Europe and Asia, first thought might be, well, let's create some pie charts out of this. If you haven't used pie charts a lot, you're likely to be encountering a surprise here. If I highlight this data and go to the Insert tab in the ribbon and choose pie, and I'll just use a simple 2D pie, it might have you scratching your head a little bit because it says domestic. And even though we selected Europe and Asia, this only shows a single series, the domestic series. In other words, the pie isn't layered. And by shrinking this doesn't change anything at all. We're still only showing domestic, as you might expect by doing this, but that's a limitation. An alternative approach to this is what's called a donut chart. Let's start with this data highlighted, and this time we'll go to the Insert tab again. Other charts. Start with this donut chart right here. Display the contribution of each value to a total, like a pie chart, but it can contain multiple entries. There we go. That's a bit tough to read, isn't it? Let's change the chart style. That might help. There we go. But we've got a lot of labeling to do and/or drawing arrows or somehow to explain this. I wouldn't say this is unworkable. We might want to show fewer regions, in other words, just domestic in Europe. But it's not even clear which region is which here. So one approach to this might be on the Layout tab in the ribbon, under the Chart Tools ribbon, top there, Data Labels. Let's show the labels. And right away, you're thinking, well, that could be helpful, but on the other hand, you have to keep going back to the data to figure out what's what. So what might we try here? Let's double click on one of the series, say the outer series, just any one of these, just double click. And immediately we see Format Data Label, so maybe we could add the series name. And I think as soon as you see that, you might be saying, well, yeah, but there's Asia down there every single time, isn't there? There is no good way to put these labels out here except by doing them manually. I think that's an oversight here, but that's the way it is. Now, we might reconsider for the moment here, close this dialog box. What if we were to show this data for only 6 months? You might be saying, well, yes, but I want to share the whole year. Well, at least try this to see how that might look. And I think at least we're getting into something that could be more readable. I'm sure you wanted to show Asia in this, but maybe you don't for the moment, and you can see what's happening here. So we do have some possibilities here, but we're sort of setting this up as a solution and then sort of reneging a little bit perhaps. I think you want to experiment with this. Double click again, one of the rings. Actually, it's best to click outside or then come in and double click. So we get these choices here. The series name, at least explore that. Category name is redundant if you have a legend as we do here, but possibly you could get rid of the legend and then keep these indicators. But now we still don't know, based on what we're seeing here, which ring is which is domestic, which is Europe. And then you notice this oddity. The blue value here that I'm circling is a 60, and the inner value is an 80. Well, obviously 80 is bigger than 60, but it surely doesn't look it here. So I think you're gonna need to experiment with this. You might want to change the order of the series. Some of you know how to do that to accommodate this. And there's certainly some other approaches here, but at least it's an attempt to try and show information by way of a pie chart in a similar kind of arrangement, in other words, circular. But I think you'll have to experiment with a bit. A third alternative here that some people prefer is simply a 100% stacked column chart, so that's another alternative as well. Another kind of chart is a bubble chart, and this is an unusual chart, and it's one of those charts where you always have to explain how to read it. Think of it as a scatter chart with another dimension in it. In this example here, we've got the ages of people, their salaries, and they'll say a job rating. And so, turning this into a chart, we choose Insert, Other Charts. Now, what's the advantage of bubble? What's the description? Resembles a scatter chart, but compares sets of 3 values instead of 2. The third value determines the size of the bubble marker, which is displayed with a 3D effect. That's because I'm choosing the second option. This option over here is 2-dimensional. Let's try this 3D. And I think when you see this, you might be pretty disappointed. What's going on here? Well, first of all, let's make the chart a little bit bigger. It's going to help. And the first order of business here would be to shrink the size of the bubbles. Let's just double click. Notice that they are different sizes, and although it's not obvious yet, they are reflecting the entries in column C, the job ratings. When you double-click on a bubble, the Format Data Series dialog box opens, Scale Bubble to, and maybe we'll make this be 50%. And then simply close it. That's going to be helpful. We don't need the legend here. Let's get rid of that. And furthermore, the indicators across the bottom of the screen here, they start at 20 and end at about 55 or so. So double click the bottom axis here and make the minimum here be 20. And for the maximum, how about 55 or thereabouts? That's going to be helpful a lot. And with regard to the salaries on the left-hand side, looks like the bottom of this should be around 20,000. So we'll double-click the left-hand vertical axis there and change the minimum. In other words, override the automatic setting, make it be 20,000. Now, you may have noticed an odd thing about the data here, and also about the fact that nothing across the bottom indicates age, and the word age isn't here. I'm going to go to cell A1 and type in age, and the chart becomes worthless. I'm not sure why that happens, but the workaround would be, if you truly want to indicate this, you can put in your own label in the axis underneath the date here to indicate that it is age. But when the word age appears there over in cell A1, it does not allow us to create the bubble chart properly. So how do we read this? And I did indicate that you do have to do some explaining. Think of it as a scatter chart representing various people in the organization, their ages, and their salaries by simply looking at the grid, but the size of the bubble represents the job performance. Now, some people might question why we're mixing those in with the scatter chart information, but that's what we're doing here. This person here, whoever it is, has an age, 46, 47, somewhere in there. As you slide the mouse over, you can momentarily see what that represents. The age is 46, the salary is 64,000, you read that off the left axis, and the job performance is 9, which is relatively good. Here's someone here who has a relatively higher salary compared with some people, and yet has a job performance of 2. In other words, reflecting the size of the bubble. One thing that's been pointed out about this too, our eyes don't necessarily read these bubble sizes that well. This here, for example, that's a size 4. This is a size 2. What's this one here? A 6? Does it look that much bigger? It looks like the 2 is pretty small. But at least there's some merit here, and if you don't like this style, you might switch it to the 2-dimensional style. And again, if we simply click in the chart, go to the Design tab, and then the second button from the left, possibly the 2-dimensional bubble, maybe that works better. Not as interesting as the other one though. And a third kind of chart you're unlikely to see, but occasionally you might. It's called a radar chart, and we don't have it set up here just yet. And this kind of a chart measures information, and you can use multiple ranges. I want to say it's a variation on a line chart, but not really. Let's show it rather than trying to define it. Insert, Other Charts, Radar, and there are 3 options here. Data relative to a center point. We've got a couple options here. All of them are really to center point, but it's the shading differences that we're talking about. I use the first one here. And here too, I think you're going to have to do some explaining. I can't readily admit that I've seen one of these used very often. In fact, it's been about 6 years since I actually saw one. In that situation, we immediately turned it into a column chart and it was much, much more readable. But here and there, perhaps it has some use, and I haven't found a really great example anywhere. And in this particular situation too, because of the number of points being shown here, first glance, that might be an optical illusion. It might look like a cube. Don't think of it as a cube, think of it as a web, maybe a spider web. And if we were only showing information for 5 days here, it would look like that. What it's attempting to show, and I think you can see it in the data, is that the blue line represents the average orders that we get on different days of the week, and red brings out the average number of shipments we do, or possibly the total. We don't see that in the data necessarily, but you see what's happening? And the oddity, I assume, would be the fact that on every day except Wednesday, the orders exceed the shipments. So it's a different way to display data, but it's not widely used. So we've seen 3 different kind of pie charts in this movie. The radar chart, preceded by the bubble chart, which is a variation on scatter charts, and preceded by a donut chart, which is an attempt to handle multiple ranges like a pie chart. Sometimes you need to expand a chart to include data that you didn't originally need, or maybe it just wasn't available. Standard copy-paste techniques often provide a quick remedy here. Let's suppose, looking at this data here, that we want to create a chart that includes maybe just domestic in Europe, or maybe domestic in Asia. If we did in that case, remember, we could highlight the data here, let go of the left mouse button, highlight Asia, we can create a chart this way. If we want to use the default type, we'll simply press Alt F1 to get the chart immediately on the same worksheet. Resize a little bit, maybe apply a chart style, that sort of thing. Okay, looking pretty good here. We're making a presentation, or we're about to print it, put in some labels and so on. Then we decide that maybe we do want to include Europe now. Highlight the data. It's too bad that one of the features out of the past versions of Excel we can't do anymore. I used to be able to drag this onto a chart, but sure enough, we can press Control-C to copy. And a surprise here, to get the menu choice for pasting, don't right-click on the plot area, right-click on the chart area. When you right-click on the plot area here, you don't see copy. Right-click on the chart area, you do see copy, and we'll simply paste. There we go. So now Europe is in there. If the order bothers you, you could change the order of the series. Let's not worry about that right now. So the data is looking like this. Now, we might also want to pull in, maybe at a later time, or we're looking at it right now. We've got some average data. Can we put this in here? Sure. How about a Control-C? Click out here. Control-V also works. I just did a paste. And what you might want to do in this kind of a situation is change the average column here, because it is different in nature than the other ones. Change that into a line chart. So by selecting a single series here, we can go to the Design tab, left button, change a chart type, and simply make it be a line chart, double click. So sometimes you'll mix the charts that way. But it's easy to copy and paste data onto a chart. And sometimes you'll do the reverse too. You change your mind again here, and maybe you didn't want to show the average or one of the series. And by the way, if you were to take out one of the series, you probably should also take out the average. But let's say you've changed your mind, it's a bit later, it's too late to do an undo, you don't want the average, you don't want a series in a chart, simply click there and press delete. There we go. So you can remove a series as well. So quick, easy ways to copy paste data into a chart and occasionally delete data from a chart. You can certainly base a chart on data from non-adjacent ranges on the same worksheet, but you can also get source data from different worksheets and even different workbooks to create a chart. Let's create a chart, for example, on this worksheet that's related to California sales. But we've also got an Arizona sheet here. Same layout and everything. That's not a prerequisite, by the way. And also an Oregon sheet. Let's create a chart. Now, the idea might be let's show sales from all 3 states here on a single chart. And arbitrarily, we'll just start with California here and create the chart from here simply by highlighting this data here. Press Alt F1 to get the default clustered column chart. And the legend for the moment isn't very helpful, but we'll leave it there. Let's now go get data from Arizona. So I'm going to click on Arizona here and highlight this data here. Press Control-C or right-click copy any of the different copy methods you're familiar with, and then come back to California and right-click on the chart area and paste. There we go. Notice the legend here isn't shaping up so smoothly, is it? Let's go to Oregon here too and pick up a similar range of data right there. And we'll Control C again, come back to California, click on the chart area here, press Control V to paste. So we do have the data in place, but the labeling isn't correct, and we really wouldn't stand for that. Now, one option, of course, would be to create your own text entries. You could go to the Layout tab and create an access title. You just type in whatever you want. In other words, create your legend on the fly. But a better way would be to actually make this data be related properly. So, with the chart selected, let's go to the Design tab and choose Select Data. And here we see the word sales 3 times. What we're trying to get at is the idea that we want the 3 sales here to turn up in our legend as California, Arizona, and Oregon. So for the very first sales entry, we'll click Edit, and you see what it's referring to, California, cell A4. We want it simply to say California. So let's just take this portion of the address and get rid of it and put in a double quote on the right side, and similarly on the left side, a double quote. So that says equal double quote California double quote. Click OK, and you see what's happened to the legend. And of course, we'll do this 2 more times. Second one, edit sales. And of course, here we're going to put in Arizona. It's already there, just put in the double quotes, get rid of the other stuff that's there, and OK. And of course, one more time here with Oregon. So it does take a little bit of work to get here for the labels, but in other respects, the copying and pasting is pretty straightforward and relatively easy to do. So there we go. And of course, as you would expect, this chart is reflective of changes made on the different sheets. And so even though this is on the California sheet, if we went to Oregon here, and for the very first entry for sales, maybe that was a mistake. Instead of 55, it's a 100. We'll make a change there. And even though we're not looking at it at the moment, at some point, go back to the California sheet where the chart resides. And the Oregon value here is, as we see here, it's 100, not the 55 that it had been. And probably no big surprise at that. So you certainly can get data not only from other worksheets, but also from other workbooks. A little bit of adjustment there on the legend, but otherwise fairly straightforward. If you want a chart to reflect frequent additions of new information to the source data, and you don't want to manually readjust the chart settings every single time you add new data, you could convert the source data into what we call a table. A table is a new feature introduced in Excel 2007, also available in 2010. It's reminiscent of an older concept called a list in Excel. Now, this line chart, which just as easily could have been a column chart, reflects the data we see to the left. But we might want to continue this chart into the next year and year after that even possibly. So, what do we do here? We get some new data. The January 2011 data has been recorded to us. We could just highlight these 2 cells and drag downward. That makes it a little bit faster. And we'll put in the January 2011 number, which happens to be 210. Press enter. And of course, nothing is happening to the chart because we haven't indicated in any way that the source of the chart data is to be expanded. Now, if you're doing this once a month, maybe you'll just continue to do this manually. What do we do here? Simply drag the lower right-hand corner, and as soon as we let go, the chart has been expanded. So not so bad. But you might have a situation where you are updating daily. You have to do this every day. And I've seen charts like this that pick up hourly information every so often. So there could be a faster way to handle this. One way to do this is to take the original set of data here and convert it into what we call a table. There are 4 ways to do this. By way of the menu system, you can go to the Insert tab and choose Table. If you're on the Home tab, you can choose Format as Table, or 2 keystroke shortcuts, Control-T, T for table, Control-L, remember the old list, possibly that's the way to remember it. I'm going to choose this option here, Format as Table, and it first gives us all these different formatting choices. We'll just pick one here. And then it asks us to confirm the contiguous range, and this is nearly always correct. Just click OK. Now, in addition to giving us some formatting capabilities here, what we also have is this ability whereby if we add new information here, so I'm just going to type 2/1/11, and as soon as I tab or move into another cell and watch the chart change, we see February represented there. Of course, no data yet, so we'll plug in the data here. Maybe it's 250, and as soon as we type that, of course, we see it in the chart. And maybe for the next month, and you can do it in any order you want. Next month, the number is 300. And then over here, what happened here is it changed the scaling of it. And again, you can do this a couple different ways. Type it in, drag it down this way. You see what's happening. That has some merit to it. Another approach to these kinds of situations could be, what if we just had data like this here all set up before we even had recorded any sales information? Imagine it's back in January of 2010. You're anticipating keeping a chart here for 2, maybe 3 years. We could just start here. I'm going to press Alt F1 to start the chart. It looks a little funny because we don't have any data, so ignore that for the moment. But suppose we click here in cell P2. I'm just going to type in the number there, 82, and you see what's happening to the chart. So if you set it up this way, you don't have to work with a table or work with that concept. Not that that's bad, but you just set up the months this way ahead of time, and then the next number comes in, so we'll type in the 125, and so on. But notice here that when I do this, it will change the scaling of the chart, and you would expect that. What I did see in one situation once is that someone every month wanted to paste the latest chart up on the wall, but realized after a few months that the charts weren't similar because the scaling kept changing with larger numbers. But the table concept might have some merit for you. It's easy, it's fast, you get some other formatting features with it, and it does simplify automatic updating of certain kinds of charts. As you work with charts, there certainly will be times when you want to print a chart. Sometimes charts are located on a worksheet with data. That's increasing and more common these days, it seems like. Sometimes you have a chart on its own separate sheet. In either case, you might want to print. Quick reminder here, when you do have a chart on a worksheet and would prefer to have it on a separate sheet, remember all you've got to do is to right-click in the chart area and move the chart, if that's what you want to do, and put it on a new sheet. Click here, it will disappear from this worksheet, the blue chart up above here. Click OK. It's going to be on a new sheet, and sometimes you want to do that. And the reverse is true just as quickly and easily. I want this chart to be on the worksheet. Right-click on the chart area, choose Move Chart. I don't necessarily have to put it on the same sheet that it came from or put it on the sheet that's already got charts. Put it where you want. Okay, I'll put it here. And there it is, move it around and so on. But the issue of printing comes up. Let's deal with a chart that's on a separate sheet. Chart 1 here, a separate sheet has a chart on it. Remember, the advantage of working with a chart in its own sheet is you've got only it to focus on. There's no data nearby. You can worry about all the details, the colors, the designs that you sometimes want to focus on without dealing with other aspects of the worksheet. Now, couple quick ways for getting a print preview, which I do recommend and always have recommended anytime you want to print. Your quick access toolbar in the upper left corner usually, or it could be below the ribbon. I recommend strongly right-clicking on this at least once and customizing it and add to it a print preview button. When you customize the quick access toolbar, under popular commands, you will see a choice here, and you only do this once, by the way. Print preview and print, click add, or adding this button to the quick access toolbar. Once we do this, and provided our next exit from Excel is a normal one, this button is here all the time. So when you're working with data like this, why not click that button? And there's our print preview. And we have only the chart to deal with here because we're on a chart sheet. And maybe it looks pretty good, maybe not, but you can change the orientation for certain kinds of charts. Unlikely when the chart's on its own sheet, but you might want to explore that a little bit. And you can go down this path to adjust margins, pick normal, wide, narrow, or custom margins. A real time waster here if you're not careful. So if it looks pretty reasonable, you're ready to print, click print, and you're all done. To get out of the print preview, maybe you saw something in the preview that caused you to say, well, I want to make a change on the design. Just press escape, and you will be right back onto the chart itself. Now, when you're looking at a worksheet that contains charts, sometimes the thought is, well, I want to print all the charts and the data. At other times, maybe, well, the data and some of the charts, or maybe even just a chart. If you want to get a quick print preview when working with a worksheet, simply press Ctrl F2. And we're in this print preview mode here. And so what we see here doesn't always read so clearly, and whenever you do get a print preview off of a worksheet, always look at the bottom of the screen first. This says page 1 of 2, indicating we probably got a little bit of work here to do in order to make this sensible. Do we want to include more rows, more columns? Should we shrink these charts and so on? Do we have other options available here? And you see lots of choices over here as well. So let's press escape here. Let's imagine that we want to print the data over in columns A through I, and the chart to the right, the chart below it, we want to do some resizing. Quick reminder on resizing, typically if you drag a chart from the corner, you can take care of two edges at once. That's fine, looking something like that maybe. Adjust this one. To make this a little neater and tidier, some people have to hold down the Alt key, and when you do hold down the Alt key and drag an edge, it only lets the edges of the chart line up perfectly with cell boundaries. Sometimes you don't see that so clearly until you click outside of it. So on this blue chart here, I'm going to drag the lower right-hand corner, but hold down the Alt key if I want it to be just perfect that way, and then the upper left corner. And of course, you can do that on all the sides as well if you wish. But if you do two corners, it's going to make it a little bit faster. Maybe we don't want to include this pie chart here this time, so pick the chart below the data and do the same kind of thing. And again, when you're in a hurry, these take a little bit of time. You just have to be patient with it. If this idea is important to you. Again, its purpose is simply to let you quickly line up the edges of the chart with the cell boundaries. And one more here, possibly this one, and drag this. So a quick Control F2 will get us back here. Click on Worksheet Cell, Control F2, there we go. That still says page 1 of 2. Now, a different approach to this, and it's a reminder that Excel has so many ways to achieve certain objectives that sometimes it's a little annoying. A different approach to printing can be from the status bar or lower right-hand corner with the third button over Page Break Preview. And this dialog box, just click OK. Now, what's a little bit difficult to see here is you will see a blue border here. Now, it's tough to see in this example. When you slide the mouse over it, some point here, you will see that. And you might even have to do this a little bit. There's that blue border. And I think what's revealing here is that the dotted line that we're seeing right here, indicating that's going to be on page 2. So why not drag this rightward? There we go. And then we can get this chart back in shape again. Again, a little bit of tedious dragging here to get things looking just so-so. A quick Control F2, or if you have added that button, your quick access toolbar in the upper left corner, Print Preview. How's that looking? Now it's page 1 of 1. Some people will see this and say, that doesn't look so good because we have lots of white space here. Well, then you'll just have to press Escape and go back and start redesigning the shape of the chart. But the main idea here is you sometimes do want to print data along with certain charts. Now, there are other times when you say, I just want to print this one chart. Maybe you want to print the green chart that's below the data. Click on that chart. Now, Control F2 won't work here, but the Print Preview button will, and this will show us only the chart, not any of the data around it. So that's an option as well. So we've got different approaches to approaching printing. You can print a single chart by itself. You can print a chart with the data, or if a chart is on its own sheet, you can simply print that chart by itself. There are times when you might want to copy an Excel chart into a Word document or a PowerPoint presentation. And sometimes you want to do that as if it was just a static picture, a copy-paste. At other times, you might want to set up what's called a link. In other words, make a copy of a chart, paste it as a link, and then as the data in the chart gets updated in Excel, you would like the PowerPoint presentation that shows that chart also to be updated and somewhat in a Word document too if you had pasted it there. So there is a difference between paste and paste link, and there is a difference in Excel 2010 as to how to approach this. Now, I do have a PowerPoint presentation ready, and here's the idea. This blue chart here, I want to make a copy of this simply as a static image. Right-click and copy. Using Alt-Tab, I'm going to jump into PowerPoint here. I've got my presentation set up, and on this sheet right here, I want to paste that chart. And here's where the surprise might come in. I'm going to right-click and paste. So kind of message here about open dialog box is in editing mode. It's not going to work in 2010 the way it has in prior versions. Let's go back to Excel here. This time the chart is selected, and on the Home tab in the ribbon, not just a simple copy, but let's click the drop arrow, copy this as a picture. And in this dialog box, simply click OK. We'll jump over to PowerPoint now, and right-click, paste. This will be pasted as a static image. You might want to make it larger and do the other kinds of things you might want to do in PowerPoint to manipulate it. All right, I've got another slide here. And let's, by way of contrast, jump back into Excel and then come back here and paste that chart as a link. And we use a different chart this time, the chart that's below the data. This time, right-click in the chart area and do a straight copy. Then jump over to PowerPoint. And on this slide here, we'll use the arrow under the paste button on the Home tab. Paste special, and then paste link. Creates a shortcut to the source file so that changes to the source file will be reflected in your presentation. So we'll click OK. Different chart, but it's going to look very similar to the first kind of chart that we pasted. But this one is a link. Here too, you might want to make it larger. And even though the charts are different in the way the data is organized, they're both showing the same columns. And notice that the domestic for January here is 100, and in the previous chart, here, domestic is 100 for January. So let's jump back to Excel and show the difference when we change the data. Instead of that being 100, maybe we make an adjustment here, it's at 150. And here in Excel, of course, as I press Enter, all these various charts here that are linked to this data are going to change. And so there's the 150 right there. The chart to the left, which has been copied, it's 150. So is our line charts and the others that we have not put into a PowerPoint. So we're going to jump back into PowerPoint, see what's happened. In this first slide here, it's actually on slide 2. The change to 150 is not reflected at all. How about on the next slide? There it has been reflected. In other words, this is linked. It is reacting to the fact that there are changes in Excel. Now, similarly, what if we close this presentation? Or better yet, save and close. I'll just do a quick save, and then from the button here, just do a close. Okay, so it's closed. Meanwhile, in Excel, our file's still open. We're making some adjustments to the data. And although probably in real-life situation, the data wouldn't change this way, let's make that January domestic entry again different. We'll make it be 200 right now. And as you would expect, the charts here will change. The PowerPoint file is closed. But let's go back into PowerPoint, perhaps at a later time, and open that file from the Office button. And just choose the name of it as Presentation 1. Update the links. There we go. So here's that first chart. This is the one that was the paste. It is not reflecting any change, not only to the 150, nor to the 200. How about the other chart here? We see the change there. It is reflecting that change of 200. So you see the difference here between a paste and a paste link. And similarly in Microsoft Word, similar kind of setup and so on. And particularly if you're putting together a whole presentation that might be involving not only Excel files, but also Word and PowerPoint files, the whole presentation, you might want to have linked charts or simply charts as pictures. But we've seen in the example here both techniques for copying and pasting a chart as a static image or copying and pasting it as a dynamic link.